Patriot Act, why or why not? Keep tapping on that until we get that figured out. And real quick, while he figures this out, I forgot to mention, right here on the front row is Judy. Judy, do you mind raising your hand for everybody? So candidates, do you all see Judy right there in the center of the front row? She will be the one who is giving you the time card. So each question and each candidate will have 1 minute to answer your question. You will have a 30-second mark, and then at the 1 minute mark, there will be a stop sign and a lovely chime, I'm told, that will be played, and it will signify to you that it's time to wrap up. I will allow you to wrap up your thought in 1 or 2 brief sentences, but we won't have time to go beyond that.
The minute's up, Brad.
This mic is working.
Yeah, if that one can. Okay. And Brad, again, so your time has not started. Don't worry. I'll ask the question one more time. So this first question for all candidates is: would you get rid of the Patriot Act? Why or why not?
Well, first, that works. That's amazing. So, first of all, thank you, Gail. Thank you, everyone, for putting this together. It's great to be back here. It seems like we were just here a few weeks ago doing something like this, right? And appreciate all of you that are state delegates. I know it's a big sacrifice. I know it's a lot of work, but it's really important work. So thank you very much. In terms of the Patriot Act, in terms of FISA, which is going to be discussed over the next week or two, we all understand the value and the importance of the Constitution. It's to protect us from a federal government that's intrusive, a federal government that, wow, that goes fast, a federal government that has the ability to wade in and do things and cause difficulty in our lives. And I think both with the Patriot Act and the discussion that's happening this month, there are problematic elements to both. And we know that the federal government at times is spying on American citizens. These types of things are not acceptable. I hope Congress does the right thing next week and doesn't renew FISA the way that it is currently outlined. Wow, that's a minute. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And Brian is not here, so we will immediately go on to Jason.
Yes, thank you, Gail, and thank you for all the delegates and everyone in attendance and for the forum for putting this together. I agree with Brad that the Constitution is pretty clear that the overriding principles of the Constitution that made it work is it provides life, liberty, property, and it gives us freedom. The Patriot Act, in the ways that it infringes upon that, becomes unconstitutional and un-American. And with things like FISA 702, it becomes, quite frankly, fascist. Those are familiar with FISA 702. It's saying that as information is gathered, as you're looking at people who are not American and who are people of interest that we need to be protected from, as we're gathering information on them, if we incidentally gather information on Americans, that it can be used. And that's even without a warrant from a judge. So that is against everything that we believe as Americans. FISA 702 should not be renewed in its current form. And it's because it's un-American. So we need to be following the Constitution. That's our safe harbor.
Thank you. Carolyn.
I agree with everything, including the thanks to all of you for being delegates and being here. It's clear we saw this during the Trump election, right? That we had spying that was taking place by the previous administration on Trump's people, or by, excuse me, not the previous administration, but by the administrative state that is has been referred to as a deep state. It wasn't that many years ago when I thought that was hyperbole. It is not hyperbole, clearly. And we know that through FISA, this very thing was occurring where people could be targeted, American citizens could be targeted, and we literally had members of members of Trump's team who were specifically being targeted through this type of authorization. We have the Constitution for a reason. I served a mission in a country that was just released from the totalitarian hold of the Soviet government. It is clear what happens in those situations. And if we do not understand the principle, we will not push back when it is violated just a little. And we are to a place now where those principles that protect us constitutionally are being violated on every level.
Brent.
Hi. This is just another example of a government program that starts out with good intentions and ends poorly. The intentions, of course, initially were to be able to protect the homeland after 9/11. We needed that, and there are a lot of things that are happening in homeland security that are important. They established these FISA courts, and a lot of you may not know, but we actually had one of our federal district court judges here who sat on the FISA court by designation. He's since passed away, but I remember talking to him about that because they're secret courts. They're not like our regular courts where you have an adversarial system where someone can represent the other side and make sure that there are fair things happening. And not surprisingly, virtually every subpoena, every permission to wiretap, to do those kind of things was accepted and allowed. We can't have that in America, and so we go from having a good program that was going to protect the homeland to one that started to spy on us and to affect our personal rights, and that needs to stop.
Trent.
Well, thank you all for putting this on, and definitely to all the state delegates. I'm so grateful for you and for your service. As Rob mentioned, it's a 2-year commitment, and as a convention-only candidate, I have also pledged that I want this to survive past convention. For these 2 years, be engaged in monthly town halls, and I'm 100% committed to that. I think it's going to strengthen our caucus convention system. As with respect to the Patriot Act, absolutely would repeal it. I think its implementation and authorization of FISA back in 2008 have been incredibly problematic. Fourth Amendment issues for sure. I mean, we need to be secure in our papers, persons, and effects, and the impact that we have with respect to warrantless searches. It's very, very concerning. I mean, what was most concerning to me is to see our great Senator Mike Lee in Oversight Committee speaking with Christopher Wray of the FBI. And he sat there just with a smirk on his face. He said, we've got examples of over 200,000 times where you have conducted warrantless spying of Americans, sir. What is your process? And he wouldn't even say. So we've got to get rid of, we got to get rid of this. We got to have bureaucrats that are actually accountable to the folks that we, the people, elect.
Chandler.
Usually I like the word patriot, and usually lately it's the Democrats who get a little bit up in arms when we say something like patriot. But in this case, yeah, government always has the tendency to creep, grow. So what started out as a good thing to protect us against foreign nations has now been abused to become something that can be used for our own government to violate our constitutional rights. That's why I'm running to make sure that we push back against an expanding federal government. We really need the power to stay at a local level, because it's at a local level where we know what our problems are, we know what solutions are most effective. I'm running from a rural area, Orangeville, which is down by Price, if you know it. It's a great small town. And in that space, I saw a headline recently that said that the rural voice is the biggest threat to American democracy. That's not a statement I agree with. I think the biggest threat to American democracy is a socialist agenda that moves us more and more toward the government doing more and more for us, taking more and more from us to do it, and infringing on our constitutional rights.
Jeremy.
Well, the Patriot Act was a response to the attack on 9/11. And that response, unfortunately, was to create more bureaucracy. It created the Homeland Security, other agencies. It made us a less lean fighting machine against our enemies. It also created a system where we have to take our shoes off and stand in line like sheep going through a pen to get out of an airplane. In Israel, they don't do that. They figure the airline companies are most motivated to protect themselves from acts of terror. And it works better and tested. The system we have in America, and people are able to get through it pretty much at the limit, but they don't go through the theater of making us feel safer and line up. You don't give us that. The FISA court is also greatly misused. I think when someone is asked to be investigated by the FISA court, their chances are just 1 in 4,000 that FISA will say no. So it's really, I just want to see less government rather than even more efficient, that government.
Josh?
Well, I'll say to start, I'm a little disturbed to hear news of one of our fellow candidates having lost his wife in the last week. I don't know what happened there, but gosh, it's hard news to get right before answering these questions. But I think that some of the other candidates have made some great points already on this, that unreasonable search and seizure, unwarranted search, we've had some problems in our executive branch in the last couple of years. It's been subjective. We've had some bias in some of our agencies. I think it needs to be investigated. I'm one who favors overturning the Patriot Act and looking at new avenues. We've got a bit of a problem with how much they've been eavesdropping on our own people without reasonable cause. So that's my position on that.
Thank you, candidates. So we will move to the second question, and I've been told that Brian is on his way. We will let him jump in as soon as he gets here, but we will not go backwards to let him answer questions that he doesn't have or what he wasn't here for. So we're going to be going to you, Jason, for this next question. And the question is, when you say you will fight for Utah, what does that mean, and how does that translate into getting good things done?
Well, thank you, first of all, but getting good things done is I like that phrase better than getting things done. Because a lot of times I think when people say getting things done, we're talking about Mitch McConnell, which as near as I can tell, all he's getting done is passing the Democrats' agenda. So when it comes to the state of Utah, there's several things that we can work on. But I also want to say that a lot of times voting against bad legislation is the best thing a U.S. Senator can do to get good things done. There are a lot of things that need to be voted against in the Senate, and especially with how liberal this presidency's been. But how about talking about passing Senator Mike Lee's REINS Act? That's a phenomenal piece of legislation that takes away power from the bureaucracy. How about regulating federal regulators, not regulating them, term limiting them? Why are we not talking about term limiting federal regulators? How about helping pass Senator Mike Lee's Housing Act? How about talking about lands issues of returning to some of the 65 to 67% of the land of Utah the federal government owns? It's not right. There's a lot of Utah issues that we can go fight for.
Carolyn.
So in my time working in politics, this was my consistent refrain. And now it has become this because the numbers have changed. We are $34.5 trillion worth of getting things done debt. And it's time to stop that. We need, exactly as this question alludes to, we need to be getting the right things done, which are the difficult things. Because we are so distracted in the raiding of the Treasury, that is the bread and circuses that are keeping the people calm and fat and happy. I don't mean to point this at you, maybe you said it. And that truly, that has become a distraction from the important things and the difficult things. And that has created a situation where we've given the people we elect an excuse to not do those difficult things that really are the urgent things. My entire life, we've talked about, asked the question, how long can we kick the can down the road? We have kicked it to the end of the road. It is a dead end. There's a cliff on the other side, and we have 1 foot hanging over the side of the cliff. So it is things like massive reform. I have no time for the details.
You know, getting things done depends on the thing that's getting done. There are things like the border that we can shut that down immediately. There are things like our budget problems, which we can stop excessive spending immediately. But I noticed the Eagle Forum is one of the co-sponsors of this. Sometimes getting things good done take a long time. And it takes winning the hearts, minds, and souls of people. That's one of the things I've learned. Many of you have learned that I spent many years as a director of the Federalist Society. We saw a problem when I got out of law school with judges who were out of control doing what they called equity and not actually interpreting laws as required under the Constitution. So that wasn't to get things done, just like the Eagle Forum could be done overnight. That was to get things done that I spent 36 years working when I was working for President Reagan, to President Bush, and also on my own, working through the Federal Society to change the judiciary and get us to where we now are with a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. Sometimes getting things done is being dogged, being conservative, doing it for a long time to make sure things actually change.
I appreciate the question. Getting the right things done is the most important thing we can do. And what is that? I mean, we've got to close the border. Number one, it's going to have a huge impact for Utahns. I see over 150,000 active cases that ICE is working here within just our own state. That's incredibly problematic and disruptive to the state. We've got to stop printing money. We've got to go ahead and balance the budget. Those things are going to have huge, enormous impacts to Utahns. We need to unleash energy dominance, and ensure that we get back to where we were under President Trump, less than $2 a gallon gasoline. With those two things, with lowering the cost of energy and stop printing money, guess what? Inflation isn't going to be roaring its ugly head the way it has been, where it's costing an extra $9,000, $10,000 for average Utah families. And these are things that we can get done, but it's going to take people that are America first and are constitutional conservatives. That's why when Senator Tommy Tuberville was out here endorsing my candidacy, he said, look, Trent supports President Trump. He's going to join our executive steering committee. That's only 18 right now. That's the problem. We got to have the majority within our own caucus, because we can't just elect people with R's next to their name. They've got to be America first, constitutional conservatives. They're going to go ahead and move this agenda forward.
Getting good things done can often mean not doing bad things, getting power back into the power of getting power back into people's hands. So I grew up in coal country, Carbon and Emery County. My grandpa was a coal miner in the area, and it used to be that we had 30 mines and 7 federal mine regulators. Now we have 30 mine regulators and 7 mines. And that's the story of government. That's the story of the federal government. Growth, growth, growth. We need to look at getting back to the Constitution. Is this something that the government should be doing in the first place? I often have people say to me, well, what are you going to do as senator for me? And my response, very candid, is as little as possible according to the Constitution. I want to get back to government so that we can cut back on what the government does for us, and we can get power back to the people so that we can take care of ourselves. That's the strength of America. It's in our people. It's not in a bloated federal government that incurs $34 trillion of debt to do stuff for us. It's in a government that takes only what's necessary so that we can keep our money in our pockets and pursue our innovations, our dreams, and accomplish the things that make America strong and great.
Well, my approach is a bit different from the other candidates. I think we need to restore the Constitution so it functions as originally intended.
Amen.
This approach of just trying to pick better representatives and hoping it can make a difference just isn't working. There's several ways that the Constitution is supposed to be protecting us, and it's a bit hard to go through it in 1 minute, but my website is jeremyfriedbaum.org.com or healingtheconstitution.org. First method I approach is we've got 29 senators in the state of Utah, and we've got 29 counties. And the Constitution would have us have a Republican form of government, which is guaranteed us under the 4th Article of Faith, and we should have 1 senator per each county. And that would give us a conservative representation in all the states in the country, except maybe Hawaii. And California wouldn't be able to go as left as they can. This happened in 1963 when Earl Warren took up a case. And Earl Warren was the governor of California. He hated these counties with more cows than people, telling them what to do. And so when he was appointed Chief Justice by Eisenhower, this was a passion of his. And so the country's really been deprived of strong conservative state government since 1963 when the Supreme Court passed that.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Well, I'll start with a disclaimer. I don't think anyone on the stage is more fiscally and socially conservative than I am. Now, maybe they'll debate that. But if you go look at electjoshmandel.com, you can read about it and you can see where I stand on things. Having said that, I will tell you this: Democrats are not the enemy. Democrats are not the enemy right now. The enemy in this country is false educational ideas, flattery of prominent men, a general immorality. That's the enemy. I like what Brent had to say when he talked about the changes that we need. We need to change some hearts, and we need to change some souls. And I know that sounds spiritual to a lot of people, but we are in Utah County. This is a spiritual county. That's the truth. We need to speak in ways where we address what the enemy is. And I would agree with what, Chandler said too. Socialism is one of those false ideologies. It doesn't work. He's right. But we need to have the narrative right, and we need to speak the way that's going to persuade and change people. People can change. That's what we need to do. Changing people.
Thank you, Josh.
For the last year, I've been working on this Senate campaign in one form or fashion. And one of the things that's been very clear to me as I've traveled around the state is Utahns want, they deserve, and they need to have a conservative that's going to go back to Washington and fight to get good things done. I was reading the news this morning and thinking about actually some work that we did 3 or 4 years ago. Both when Representative Cheryl Acton came into my office when I was Speaker of the House and wanted to change the statute in the state to make Utah's laws more pro-life. And then shortly thereafter, McKay and Lisenby came in and wanted to pass some legislation to also make laws in Utah more pro-life. And before I got into the legislature, I actually served on a board of directors that helped with preventing abortions and preventing child abuse. And I care deeply about this issue. And the attorneys told me at the time, these things are going to be litigated in the courts. They're going to be tied up forever. And my point was, I don't care. Let's pass this legislation. We need to fight for the things that matter to us as Utahns. We need to fight for the things that we value in this state. And that's what getting good things done looks like, is caring about our values and doing what we can to protect our values. Thank you.
Thank you. So for this next question, we'll start with Carolyn. And the question is, and again, this is the same question for all of you. The question is, what makes you better equipped than any other candidate running to actually change Washington?
Okay. Wow. All right. I will tell you the work that I've done, both for Senator Lee and when I worked for the Utah House Majority under Greg Hughes, makes clear the work that I have done on deeply conservative, constitutionally based policy allows me to understand these issues from a constitutional basis better than anybody else running in this race. I will also say that my expertise as a mother who has raised 5 boys reasonably successfully. I think there are a lot of times we learn in dealing with these relationships in families that we have to figure out and understand how to negotiate different opinions without compromising on principle and what the absolute most important goal is. And that is what I have spent my entire life doing, both in my home in the 20 years that I was home raising my boys and in my work in politics. Perfect timing. That is the skill that I bring.
I'm very different than every other candidate in this race because I've worked in all 3 branches of the federal government. I worked in the Congress. I was lucky enough after law school to become a law clerk to Robert Bork, probably the top constitutional scholar and one of the most best conservative judges in the country. I worked for President Reagan in his Justice Department. I worked in the White House as Associate White House Counsel for President Bush. And then as I talked about, I spent all the 30-some years changing the Supreme Court and lower court justices through the Federalist Society. Nobody in this race has that type of experiences. I've had 2 presidents who have trusted me with this, and I've spent my entire life, even as a practicing lawyer, representing individuals and large companies in important cases and advocating for them. So at every level, I've represented clients. I've been in the government. I've seen the blood sport it is, particularly with Judge Bork, and know how to do that. Thank you.
This is an important question, and I think, you know, what you're going to hear from all these candidates, and you as a state delegate, you've got a very important role. I mean, you're vetting so many right now, and you're going to hear a lot of conservative ideology. Most people here are going to be espousing conservative ideals. What I think is the most important thing, though, and the quality that you should be looking for as a delegate, and what you should be looking for as citizens, is who has demonstrated the willingness to stand up. Who's demonstrated the willingness to stand up and fight the establishment? It's the establishment that's got us into $34.5 trillion in debt. Open borders, you name it, all the issues we have today. I've done that time and time again. I entered the race in May when Mitt Romney was still undecided and continued to challenge him from day one. And others in this race, you know, come in subsequently. We've now got a number of folks that have entered the race, but I've demonstrated that time and time again. That's why I've encouraged people to go to TrentStaggs.com. Take a look at a page that I have entitled Proven Fighter. Not only was I willing to challenge Romney and call him out time and again, but I stood up to lockdowns while as a mayor, rejected mandates and of any kind, and I've fought high density housing, inappropriate materials in school, you name it. So I've not just talked the talk, but I'm able to walk the walk, and that's what we need back in DC, is somebody that's going to go back and fight the establishment.
So I mentioned that my grandpa was a coal miner. When he was in his late 20s, in a terrible mine accident where a fellow worker got caught on fire during a smoke break, he raced to save him and ended up with third-degree burns over 75% of his body. And he said, "We need good men and women in our coal mines, but I don't want you to be one of them." So he said, "Go get all the education you can and get a good job." From BYU, where I graduated top of my class, I went to Harvard Law School and got a law degree. I also went to Oxford and got a master's in history. I followed my grandpa's advice. I went and got all the education I could. If you look at DC, you see a consistent formula. You see young senators with good credentials make big impacts for their states. You can see that in Texas with Ted Cruz. You can see that in Arkansas with Tom Cotton, Ohio with J.D. Vance. I'm an option for Utah, offering that strong academic credentials that are respected and mean something in DC, but not going into it straight from school. I got real life experience to supplement my book smarts. 10 years ago, I started a company that supports children's literacy. That lets me do this not as a career, but as an opportunity to promote Utah's values.
I don't mean to put myself above the other candidates as I try and answer this honestly, but I try and seek the will of God in everything I do. I try and work in humility when that's called for, and in boldness when that's called for. And God has worked several miracles in my life, daily miracles. I think when you think of George Washington kneeling down by his horse in prayer, coming up with a strategy to just keep the army alive, suffer loss after loss after loss, until he's able to pull off a victory that the world thought was impossible. This is the way I live my life. You have to avoid temptation, the richest club on earth, which is the U.S. Senate. I don't care about big mansions. I don't care about new houses. I care about what I meet my maker, being judged for my actions. I want those same patriots that have revealed themselves to Wolfgang Goethe in the St. George Temple to give me a handshake and say thank you for trying to restore what we began.
Well, I would say as a legislator, you're going to legislate what you are. And to tell you a little bit about what I am, I'm a father of 6 kids under the age of 10, concerned about the next generation. I am a CPA. For my living, what I do is an audit manager right now for the Trust Lands Administration, which some of you might have concerns about how trust lands are administered and what we do with those lands. But I look at laws, I look at contracts, I look at leases, I look at the details, and then I'm looking for financial ramifications in hundreds of pages of law. It's different. I know it's different work. It's a lot of work that people don't want to do in a different forum than we were when I asked how many people wanted to be a CPA. People don't want it. It's not the funnest work sometimes in a lot of people's minds. But that's what I would bring to the Senate, is somebody who's going to comb through legislation for the financial ramifications and help simplify it for other senators and show them, say, hey, this is how we're going to make the changes. It's a different mindset. It's a different approach, but it's unique. I haven't run for office before, but I feel strong. They said, what would you look for? Someone who can help us strengthen the country and help us fix the problems. I'm confident that I can help us with our budget and get other senators on board. I'm confident with that.
You know, we all know that the stakes are really, really high in this election this year. And I think we all know that it's very risky to elect someone that's unproven. And what we need is we need someone that's been tested and trusted to do the work that we care about, to go back and represent Utah's values in the US Senate. With me, you have that. Whether it's the biggest tax cuts in the history of the state, keeping government small and taxes low, or calling the legislature into special session in June of 2020 to make DEI and CRT illegal in terms of having those issues taught in our schools, or whether it's taking on the EPA and suing the EPA to keep Utah's power plants open so your power rates didn't double and you didn't have to worry about brownouts and blackouts. We have to elect someone that has been through the fire, that we know can do the work and know can go back to Washington and represent this amazing state. Thanks.
I've never been in politics, so I'm a business person, and that sets me aside uniquely in this election. And I firmly, and I can't say this strong enough, with the problems that I see happening in America right now, a politician is not the answer. We need more business people. We need business leaders exactly like Donald Trump. Now, when I've met with senators like Senator Mike Lee, Senator Ted Cruz, and others, they ask the same questions you delegates do, which is how do we know how you're going to vote when you actually get in Washington and the establishment starts putting the pressure on you? So I have lived a life where I'm not going to go into it. I have suffered unspeakable hardships in my personal life, many. I started a business out of my garage, and with no outside investors, I built it in one of the largest pest control companies in the country. That's hard. It's hard. When I entered this race, I ran television ads and radio ads all up and down the state calling against Mitch McConnell. Even when my own campaign staff said, don't do that. He'll put millions of dollars against you in your own Republican primary. I did it to show you delegates and everyone in Utah that I will stand up. And I'm not just talking about it. I will stand up, and I have. And I'll keep doing it in Washington.
Thank you very much. So this next question, we'll start with you, Brent. And the question is, what do you see as the greatest danger with regard to the central bank digital currency? Do you think it should be allowed? Why or why not?
That's a good question. As we all know, as we're getting more into the electronic age, and I serve on a bank board, and I know that none of the banking can happen now without electronic transactions. But where we're getting now is we're worried about the safeguards, whether or not we're keeping up with the technology in a sense that all of us are going to be protected. I worry, like I think you do every night, that every transaction that you have in your bank account can go away with just the flick of a switch. We know that Putin and Russia are hacking into our potentially our elections and everything about our banking. We know that China is doing the same thing. We're in a constant onslaught. And unless we stay vigilant as we grow through this electronic economy, we're going to be in trouble. And one of the things we need to protect, of course, is our personal identities as well as our incomes.
No, I don't think it should be implemented. I said in the previous debate, hey, I'm not a fan of centralized much of anything, right? I think that what happens, and with respect to centralized central bank digital currency, is that it's really and highly susceptible to tyranny. And to the question earlier about the Patriot Act and FISA, we've seen this government actually abuse its power and authority. And I don't want to give any more of that. That's what our founders understood. And they understood, that's why they developed a system called federalism that we're not doing a great job at right now. And I think that's where somebody with my experience, both in the business sector, with dealing with all the regulation that we've had to deal with, and that, but also as a mayor for 10, 11 years, I said, I've been on the front lines of pushing back against not just federal, but also state and county overreach
And so we need somebody with that type of perspective in DC that's going to go back there and safeguard our rights as we the people, that understands that local governance is what governs best. And that's what we need, is to be able to get back there and make sure that the federal government's only doing what it's supposed to in Article 1, Section 8.
Yeah, the issue is in the name, central. Right there, cues you into that. We are so far from the gold standard, which is where we started as a nation. Then we went to silver. Now we're way off silver. Now we're $34 trillion in debt. Imagine the nightmare when we just aren't even printing anything and it's just all digital. It just continues us on that path of easy money, and that's been the federal government's approach. A few of us up here have had experience in business. The first thing they'll tell you at the BYU Business School is business is a cycle. The economy is a cycle, and we keep delaying the constriction part. And it's hard. No president wants to oversee a recession, but it comes at a great expense, kicking the can down the road, printing more money. If you look right now at how many $100 bills are in circulation, it will terrify you. The solution for the Fed is to print, to control the interest rates, to keep the economy strong so the president doesn't look bad. And that comes at a great expense to us as we pile up $34 trillion of debt.
Thank you. Full disclosure, I'm an authorized partner with a company called Goldback. If you haven't seen a Goldback, go to goldback.com. They're bills that are infused with gold in the middle of two plastic sheets. They have 1/1000th of an ounce of gold in one Goldback and more in the others. It's a great thing. It's technology that allows us to use gold and silver. As the founders anticipated, as the writers of the Constitution said, really our only job should be securing the weights and measures of our currency. We should get rid of the Fed and put real gold in everybody's pocket, not just gold, other precious metals. And so that's the solution.
Well, being the last person to answer it, just about. Am I the last person to answer this? No, okay. After some of the answers are already given, I feel like I'm redundant now, but I mean, the worry of central digital banking currency is whatever the priorities of the people are who hold the levers of that bank. I mean, it's kind of like the Federal Reserve, and which I would tell you, I would decentralize or decommission from some of its mandates. We've got a real problem that we're all watching the market to see what the Federal Reserve is going to do with interest rates. Think about how much they're manipulating our economy and how much problems they're causing in volatility. I think of these truckers up in Canada. I don't know all the ins and outs of this story, but the government getting in and freezing their assets, not allowing them to get in their accounts because the social priorities of their government aren't being met. I mean, that's central digital banking currency. It's written all over that. I mean, there's just no way. We can't watch that happen. We can't have the social priorities of the people in power determining how we use our bank accounts. I mean, law of the harvest is out the window. Capitalism, out the window. It's scary that we're even thinking about it.
The tenet of this question honestly just ticks me off. We live in a time right now, the answer isn't no, excuse my language, but it's hell no. And I'll tell you why. We live in a time when there is so much power concentrated with so few individuals in Washington, D.C., that they have the power to create chaos in our economy, chaos in our lives. And the last thing we need is another tool to be used to weaponize our government against us. And I know that sounds maybe like it's a little conspiratorial, but I actually believe we live in a time when that's not terribly far-fetched. Whether you're talking about having Mitch McConnell have power for 16 years in Washington, our founding fathers never imagined that someone would have power that length of time, or the fact that now, because Congress is not doing its job, bureaucracies and unelected bureaucrats all over Washington are trying to rule our lives. The last thing we can afford is to give them more tools to create problems for the American people. So we've got to be vigilant about these types of things. Thank you.
When's the last time a centralized anything worked well? So why don't you please share with me one centralized system that we've done that isn't corrupt? You show me a federal agency, especially all these unconstitutional, bureaucratic, I call them the three-letter agencies that make me want to say four-letter words. You show me the one that isn't corrupt, that hasn't been corrupted. Why in the world? This is a scary topic. This is terrifying. How did it go with having the digital election machines, the polling machines? Did that work out well? You trust those? So having done those, are you thinking, hey, maybe what we need to do is turn over our currency also to the elite? This has so many scary implications, but this is a talking point for the future. This is why we need good leaders in Washington who will stand up, because I have a strong sense that the deep state and some unsavory people really want this to happen. You need people who have no sense of self-preservation, none whatsoever, that cannot be tempted, that cannot be bought, cannot be sold. And that's me.
So when I was working for Senator Mike Lee, actually, I worked repeatedly with Utah Bankers Association to ensure that Biden appointees were not people who support basically social credit scoring through our banking system, because we had to push back against that a few times. I'll tell you, I also worked with Representative Cheryl Acton at the state legislature and a number of other legislators on subsequent legislation, but she had a bill in 2022 that was killed, I think it was killed in rules, that would ban the use of social credit scores. I put together a working group with Marlo Oaks, the state treasurer, with the AG Sean Reyes, with a number of legislators and business people over that next year in order to work on ESG legislation, because social credit scores is part of ESG, is part of CBDC. It is all one and the same, and just utilizing different tools in order to come up with various ways that this could be addressed. The House and Senate had their own working groups, did some amazing things in 2023. I was the first outside individual to start focusing on this and fight back against it in the state of Utah.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with you, Trent. And the question is, how will the voters know if you were to go to Washington, D.C., that you will do what you say, and let me say this again. You'll do what you say, and you won't cave to the pressures.
Excellent question. I get this all the time. You know, we've done 70, 80 town halls across the state, campaigned for over a year. I say, hey, look, it's very easy. Take a look at that website at trentstacks.com. Look at Proven Fighter. Look at all of my time in elected office, 10, going on 11 years now. Go talk to a Riverton resident. Ask them, how do they like Mayor Trent Staggs? What has he done? Has he stood up for you? Has he stood up to the establishment? It's like Congressman Matt Gaetz said when he was just out here the other week endorsing my candidacy. He said, look, Mayor Staggs has demonstrated a willingness to stand up in times where it was not easy. And that's what I have done and demonstrated over and over again. In being the only one to challenge Mitt Romney to saying no to lockdowns and to mandates, to fighting back against high-density housing, to standing up to inappropriate materials in school, and why I've received the endorsement of Moms for America and the founders of Utah Parents United. It goes on and on. I've been there. I've actually not just talked the talk, but I've walked the walk. I've been able to do that, and I have demonstrated to others these endorsements. These are folks that I have intentionally gone out and asked for their endorsement, because I want to signal to all of you, the delegates, who I'm going to align with. You should know that as delegates, who I'm going to go back there, and they're going to have my back too and keep me true. While I was at Harvard, I read that you shouldn't get into politics until you don't need to be in politics. And I certainly had classmates who went straight on, that path from law school into staffing positions and then into political positions. But I didn't want to do this as a career. If 2 terms was enough for George Washington, 2 terms is more than enough for me. I wanted to go out and be able to do this after I had the chance to prove myself to myself and to others. So for me, I feel like I've had the chance to live the American dream, to be the grandson of a coal miner, to study at some of the best institutions in the world, to live in great cities, great experiences, and then to start my own company and move back to my hometown where I'm raising my 4 young kids with my wife.
I don't have anything to go to prove to anyone there. All I want to do is preserve the American dream for our posterity, for our kids. And that's why cutting back on the size of our federal government is crucial. At Oxford, I had the chance to see other nations that sometimes the liberals point to, Denmark, those Scandinavian countries, and say, well, we should follow that model. Well, I've seen it, and I like what we have here better. I know that it's what's been key to our success so far and is the key to our future.
You might not know. You might be deceived. A lot of people are spending a lot of money to deceive you. I would suggest that you do your best to investigate each candidate, to ask which one is most likely to resist the temptations of office. Because people are getting very rich and powerful. I wonder why people spend millions of dollars to get a job that pays a small part of that. You might want to see how close they are to defending the Constitution, how it looks like they live a covenant life with the Constitution, trying to be true to it. And so my advice is that you do all you can, this is advice of the scriptures, and pray about it. And until you get a firm answer, that you surrender your will of the vote to the Lord's desire. I believe that's possible, and I hope that's what we all do, including myself as a delegate.
Well, for me, it's the principles that you stand for. It's the person you are. And kind of what Jeremy said. I mean, it's who you are. It's a moral imperative for me. I will tell you, I'm not going to vote for deficit spending. I'm not going to vote for debt ceiling suspensions. That's an accounting side of me. It's also that I have to budget and support a family of 6 little kids, but it's not part of my fabric. And along with that, I mean, there are different things. The Respect for Marriage Act, I wouldn't have voted for it. I talk about faith, family, and fiscal discipline. This is who I am. This is the core of my life. This is the core of what I consider to be our founding fathers' lives, frankly, in our Constitution. Faith, family, fiscal discipline. It's just, you get what you vote for, no question. But those are commitments that I make to you. I would meet with you in town halls. I'll be available. If you reach out now at electjoshrandall.com, I will respond. I'll send back a response to your email. If you're a delegate who's, by raise of hands, who's reached out that I haven't got back with? One person? You talk to me afterwards. I will get back with you if I haven't. Brianna, make a note of that. Thank you.
Without a doubt, one of the themes of this, these name tags, I'm telling you. Without a doubt, one of the themes of this election has been talk is cheap. People don't want to have one thing told to them on the campaign trail and have someone show up in Washington and act totally different. They feel like we've been there, done that. And this is hard work. It takes a spine. It takes a lot of grit to stick through and work through hard issues. Let me give you one quick example. Kara Berkland came into my office in 2021, said, we need to pass a bill to the Utah legislature that keeps girls' sports for only girls. We passed it through the House, couldn't get it through the Senate. We tried that year. We came back, passed it again the next year through the House, finally got it through the Senate. But we had all kinds of people telling us that, and I had people calling me daily, business leaders, political leaders, others saying this was a solution looking for a problem. Well, we know that's not the case. We have to be courageous enough to stand up for issues like this and others, and have someone in Washington that's been through this kind of experience before, that has fought these kinds of things and is going to do the same when they get back there. Thank you.
I have a saying, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. I know a lot of people here were planning to run for the US Senate for a long time. I wasn't. I got frustrated. I had had enough, and I mean it from the literalist of sense. I've had it here before where I thought we were electing one thing in Utah and got something else. And so I stood up and I said, I know what I will do. And I tried to demonstrate that immediately by doing what apparently others didn't. And that's literally running radio and TV ads against Mitch McConnell under the threat that he would reciprocate. I have been in a room with my child in the NICU with all 13 of his medical people saying, take him off life support, he's gonna be quote unquote a vegetable. Chose not to do that because it wasn't the right thing. I have run a business where I had to meet a budget and a payroll. Went several long periods where I paid myself nothing. There's no one with their hooks into me. I have made covenants and promises only to my wife, my family, my God, and now to the people of Utah.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. Thank you, Jason. I do believe that those who have not spent months and years planning for their next political office are the very type of people we need in political office at this period of time, which I believe is our nation is in a state that is in its most precarious position, I would say, in my entire lifetime, and probably significantly longer than that. We need people who are stepping up for something other than another political office. And as somebody who raised my boys at home for many years, then began working in politics and has the knowledge and the understanding to do what needs to be done, and an unwillingness to compromise on important principles. I'll say, I've lived in Utah for 36 years. My family's from here. I live in a town founded by my third great grandfather, but I was born and raised a Mormon in New York. And you know what? I know the games. I know how to work around things, and I understand how to stand firm on principle, because truth is truth, and I will never compromise on that.
I've never changed. When I worked for Judge Bork, we fought to bring constitutional principles to every decision we fought for. When I worked for President Reagan, we fought for tort reform. We fought for what we called Reaganomics. Some people call it supply side economics. Tell me if that doesn't sound like what we should be fighting for today. Reduce taxes, free trade, and reduce government regulations. I fought behind the scenes for no glory for years, 30 plus years. And I've got names: Justice Scalia, Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, Justice Amy Coney Barrett. These are not small things. A lot of the people on the stage today are talking about ideals and what they'll do. I've been there. I've done it for years. I've done it behind the scenes. I've never changed. I know how it's done. And to be in the game, you have to know how to play the game. Thank you.
Okay, for this next question, we'll be starting with you, Chandler. And the question is, if elected senator, what specifically would you do to push back on the federal government's overreach on public lands here in Utah?
Well, we have a terrible situation in Utah, and this dates back to really to Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, a lot of people admire Teddy Roosevelt instituting the national parks, but sometimes he's the epitome of this mindset that liberal elites in other parts of the country know what's best for us in our part of the country. So you set up the national parks, and then and I'm not knocking on the national parks, but I am knocking on this attitude of a liberal base on the coast, on the East Coast, who think they know best for us what we should do here in our state. And that started at that time with setting aside wide swaths of land in America that tie up our resources, that shut down our minds, that restrict our energy independence and our ability to be energy independent. So as a senator, I would be looking to free up our lands to get control back to the state where we know what's best use for our resources, to open our minds, to get our power independence again, and be able to make good use of the resources that we have here in our state.
I'd cozy up to President Trump and ask him to have an experiment and give Utah back all its federal lands.
Yes.
And see how that works. I've already sort of cozied up to President Trump, but not because I wanted to, but because I thought it was the right thing. I introduced a petition to the city of Provo to rename the Provo Airport the Melania Trump Airport in Provo. I'd just use whatever charm and innovation I could to get this to be done, and it would be a top priority. You laugh again. Okay, thank you.
Well, I believe in the principle that government is best administered close to the people, and that certainly applies with lands here in Utah. It's amazing to me that for whatever reason, some of these states that were territories and gained statehood so late have still remained largely federal land. And for me, I mean, I work at CITLA, or Trust Lands Administration, and I guess a lot of my dealings there makes me biased, but I really feel like Utahns know how to do things well. We have a very shrewd and very smart people that make good decisions. And I'll tell you, I think part of it is just, we have to make some negotiations, but I'm all for bringing as much of it back to Utah as we can. I agree with Jeremy. Give it to Utah. Let us make use of it. Let us make revenue of it. We're wasting a lot of land. The Trust Lands Administration is big into the idea of we can't waste the land. We've got to make use of it, whether it's oil and gas drilling, whether it's potash, whether it's whatever it is. There's so many things that we can do. We can't waste it. And we need to be clear in articulating that to the federal government and say, hey, this isn't good for you, and it's really not good for Utah.
It's very simple but difficult work. Legislate and litigate. This issue across this state is one of the most important issues that we face, and it's one of the things that I'm going to lean into the heaviest when I get back to Washington, D.C. From a legislate standpoint, it makes no sense that Wyoming and Alaska have exemptions from the Antiquities Act and Utah does not. We should. I will fight for that. In addition to fighting for changes to the Antiquities Act to rein in the powers of the executive branch to even do this kind of nonsense. And from a litigate standpoint, while I was speaker, we fired up at least 3, maybe 4 lawsuits. I'm going to have to go back and check relative to public lands in the state of Utah, some of which we've never done before. But again, if you don't try, you're never going to win. We have been playing too nice, too long, and going along to get along far too long on the public lands issue in the state of Utah. And if we don't start to do some things wildly different, both with our state leaders, shoulder to shoulder with our federal leaders, this problem is not going to get fixed. It's going to get worse.
What's happening is offensive. New York, Texas, Kansas, Maine, these are states where the federal government owns less than, how much do you think? 2%, less than 2% of the land. And yet the East Coast elitists come to us and say, now that we have all of our land, we think we need to control yours. That's offensive. I'm from Monticello down in the San Juan area. So when they implemented the Bears Ears, Big Brother saying, you know what, you don't know how to be responsible stewards to the land. We're going to go ahead and do it for you. So we need to stand up and be clear. Where did this start? It started with the Enablement Act when the state was organized in 1894, 1896, where the state, they were supposed to sell the land back to us. And then they passed FLTMA, I think in 1976, which reversed that, said, you know what? We're going to do it to everyone in the East, but you in the West, we want to control your land. We're not going to sell it back. It's not right. I want to support that Senator Mike Lee's Houses Act, which says give us the federal land at least right now immediately that's around our cities so we can board affordable housing. I like Senator Mike Lee's More PILT Act that says let's have the Secretary of Interior go back and really assess how much the land's actually worth to double or triple those PILT payments. How about suing and litigating for lost economic rents? There's a lot of things that we can do. And what we don't really want is their money. We want them to give us the land. And we have several avenues to do that. I cannot wait to fight to get Utah's land back.
Yes, so we have got to get rid of the Antiquities Act. When that was passed, well, it wasn't passed. It was passed. But when the Antiquities Act was implemented, it was all about giving the executive branch the authority to lock up our lands in order to protect antiquities. And if you look at the act, it says utilizing the smallest area possible. in order to protect that antiquity. Do you know what the Obama administration started defining as an antiquity? The night sky, right? They are completely violating the restrictions and the restraints of the Antiquities Act. It has been completely abused. It needs to be gone. Additionally, Flipma, 1976, that was, we're done. All of the land and some of this had been litigated in the past with eastern states, and they had won. We need, and eastern states, Florida and other states like this, we need to now fight back. Our Attorney General, I spoke with him just a few months ago. He said, we are preparing a lawsuit. It's been funded in part by the legislature. We need to fight back against Flipma and get it gone.
The first thing we need to understand is that a lot of people back east have this vision that we don't care about our lands, that we're polluting them, we're ruining them, and they need to protect the lands against us. I go off-roading, sometimes on mountain bikes, sometimes in a Jeep. And I've never been in southern Utah or even the mountains of northern Utah where I haven't been around the people of those locations who have treated the lands in which they live and the lands in which they recreate with the utmost respect. I've seen more damage to a trail from a heavy rainstorm than I have Jeeps going across it. So when I bring people from back east, as much as I can, I take them out and I show them so that they understand. Because like I said before and others, you have to win the hearts, minds, and souls. They think we're terrible. The other thing, and Jeremy, you made a good point. It was a friendship my father made with President Trump that got their ears reduced back to a more reasonable standard. Elections matter. We have to have a president and we have to have a Congress that's going to be able to scale back on these intrusions on our land and our livelihoods.
I was picking up Senator Tommy Tuberville from the airport a few weeks ago. Beautiful day, just snowed, great blue skies. He said, y'all have a fantastic state here. I said, yeah, too bad 2/3 of it is owned or controlled by the federal government. He looked at me and he said, I did not know that. It's going to take leadership, somebody from Utah that has demonstrated that ability to build coalitions and actually get this done. And that's what I've been able to do. One of the committees that I want to be able to serve on as a senator is natural resources, which encompasses public lands. And I think having been on the business side where I've taken the company public, served on the board of directors of a company that was an energy company that owned oil and gas assets, had operations in eastern Utah. I mean, this is something I understand. And in talking with Senator Tuberville, he thought there was a great opportunity to go ahead and speak with other states, particularly those in these western states where it's so unfair. I mean, some have already pointed out, Connecticut has 0.3% of their land owned and controlled by the federal government. So the left likes to talk about equity and fairness, right? I think it's totally hypocritical with respect to our public lands. And this is something that if we can point out, I believe, and be able to serve and have representation in those committees, that we can go ahead and finally get the land back into state control.
Thank you. This next question will start off with you, Jeremy. And the question is, what is the first law you would work to repeal or pass if you were elected as senator?
Well, I'm going to change that a little bit because what I'm interested in is getting rid of SB 54. That's why I joined this race. Because no candidate has ever used his standing to challenge SB 54 up to the Supreme Court. It went up with Keep My Voice, but they rejected it because they didn't have standing. So that's my first priority. As much as I'd love to be a senator, we need to get rid of that infernal thing. And by the way, we have a lot of smart people here, but they have trouble reading a pie chart. When you have a two-way race, the more constitutional conservative Republican wins in the primary. But our history has been with a three-way race, the least constitutional conservative wins. And we're facing up to a 6 or 7 man primary. I see somebody in the audience who's been active in asking Democrats to join the Republican Party. You saw them infiltrate us in our caucuses, and it's going to be worse in our primary. They're going to have a 30 or 40% block voting for the least conservative candidate. I won't mention his name here because he's not here to defend himself. However,
Oh, I see stuff.
Yep, thank you, Jeremy. Gosh.
I don't know how to respond to that answer. Yeah. I'll tell you, the first thing I would look at the bill, in 2019, we passed a bill called the Federal Fair Employee Compensation Act. And this is something I've talked with other people on the stage a little bit about, but I'm convinced that this is crucial. It guarantees back pay for furloughed federal employees who don't go to work during shutdowns. And this is something that makes us a little different. Different approaches by people up on this stage. But I'm one who says, and I would also push for a 15 to 25% pay reduction mandatory during a shutdown for our discretionary federal employees. The reason being is we have to get our government in a place where during shutdowns, we are better off financially than we are when the government's operating. During a partial shutdown, we're better off financially. We have way too much infighting in the Republican Party every year in October when the appropriations deadlines come up. We've got to get to a point where the shutdowns are not pushing us back against the wall every year, and it becomes pick your poison. We either have deficit spending or we shut down and we still have deficit spending later on. That's got to stop. This is key. This is key to fixing our budget problems. Absolutely key.
So in the short term, love to have the ability to close the border. But in the long term, we have to change the way the federal government budgets. And a balanced budget amendment is the only way that we're going to get the federal government back on track. And, you know, in Utah, just yesterday, we were named the state with the most positive economic outlook in the country for the 17th year in a row. And that doesn't happen by chance. And not only do we balance our budget here, but while I was a lawmaker and then Speaker of the House, we did two things that have fundamentally changed the way this state thinks about small government and low taxes. We now in this state, before the legislature spends a penny, something I did with a couple of lawmakers while I was Speaker of the House, the first thing that they do now is they discuss and debate and set aside money for tax cuts on an annual basis. That is an important thing. Just imagine in Washington, if we had a balanced budget amendment and we put in place just a few of the systems we have here in Utah to get our government back to the size that it should be, you constrain the growth in bureaucracy, and you unleash the American economy and let the American consumer and all of us keep the money that we've earned and spend on the things we care about instead of letting the government do it. So thank you.
Laws to repeal, and you're only giving me 1 minute? Where do you begin with that? How about Flipman? We just talked about that one. How about the Dingle Act, which was, I think I saw an article called the Dingle Swingle. Wasn't a very good land bill for us Utahns. What about the times when the Congress has instituted these unconstitutional bureaucracies? And I'm talking about, once again, the 3-letter words that make us want to say 4-letter words. These are things that we can repeal. But when you want to talk about laws that I want to repeal, I love the Constitution. I love it. I believe the Constitution was divinely inspired. That inspiration started from our founding fathers suffering in tyranny in Europe for over 1,000 years in many cases. Tyranny because all the power was at the top and very little civil liberties. So when they came to the United States of America after suffering and going to war with England to fight of this concept that we want elected representatives, we want to be able to elect those representatives. They instituted the vertical axis of federalism. They instituted the horizontal axis, the separation of powers. Those things were divinely inspired because of the tyranny under which they suffered. George Washington encouraged us in his farewell address in the sacred maintenance of the Constitution with wisdom and virtue. We have too many laws that are the blasphemous maintenance because they fracture federalism and they fracture the separation of powers. We need those laws gone.
And you mentioned this previously, but I worked on this when I was in Senator Mike Lee's office, and that is the REINS Act that takes executive branch agency regulation, which we all know that the regulatory state is actually the regime that we are most living under as opposed to laws passed by Congress. Those people we elect to represent us, right? REINS says if you have legislation, if you have rule that does one of three different things. Two of the big ones has an impact on the U.S. economy of greater than $100 million annually, or raises consumer prices, that those rules cannot be implemented until Congress has voted on them. Congress are the people who we elect to represent us. They are answerable to us. That is constitutionally, and does exactly what you're talking about, Jason. That is constitutionally the system that was put in place in order to protect us from the power and force of government in that way. Second, I do have a second one, and that is one-issue bills. In the state of Utah, we have one-issue bills. You could solve a whole lot of problems if you couldn't Christmas tree 1,000 different things onto one good bill that a whole bunch of people make a lot of really bad compromises to get through.
Carolyn's right, and the biggest threat to our budget and our democracy is these omnibus bills, where we have Senate rules that allow them to shove them down our throats without a senator being able to look at them, find out what's in them and what should be taken out. The reason they put it, those rules have got to go. If you've got a multi-trillion-dollar bill and you've got 24 hours to look at it, what are the chances that you're going to find the bad stuff in there enough to be able to criticize that bill or to amend that bill and to get things right? Zero. I'm a lawyer. I would never let a client sign a contract, even a 20-page contract, even a 4-page contract, unless you'd have time to read it and understand what you were signing. And yet we do this constantly. The reason they shove those through is because we wouldn't put up with it. Do you know there are trillions of dollars that go to non-government organizations? These are quite often liberal organizations that they can't pass legislation to have the government do it. So they funnel money to liberal organizations so that they can do what Congress can't get through and do themselves. That's got to stop.
Well, yeah, I'm with Jason here. I only have 1 minute to talk about everything you want to repeal. Boy, listen, the border has to be secure. We're going to do that day one with President Trump back in office and with the majority of America First constitutional conservatives in the Senate when we retake it. So, border wall, remain in Mexico, E-Verify, cutting off benefits to illegal immigrants, period. That will go ahead and take care of it day one. But we've got to get back to process. This is something Mike Lee has talked about consistently. Look, 1974, we passed the Congressional Budget Act, 12 appropriation subcommittees. Each one of them is supposed to be producing a budget with enough time for debate and amendment. That doesn't happen today. It's totally un-American. To have 4 people, the firm, right, go back in a back room and come back out with a 1,200-page piece of legislation and say, you've got 24 hours to pass, so the government's going to shut down, or it'll be your fault. You know what? If pressed with that situation, I've already said, no, I'll go ahead and let it shut down then. Enough. I got into this race because it is the height of immorality, I said, to place $34.5 trillion, which started out at $32 trillion when I first announced my candidacy, on my 14-year-old son, my 11-year-old daughter. Enough is enough. We're not going to do this anymore. We're going to get back to process, but it's going to require enough Republicans that are America First, constitutional conservatives, not just people with ours next to their name.
Yes. A lot of good things have been mentioned to repeal. I've made notes so we can work on the repeals. There is one thing, I'm not usually a fan of passing and growing anything, of more, but there is one thing that didn't get mentioned that I want to highlight, and that is, I hate when someone makes a rule that applies to me or to you, but not to themselves. And Congress has a bad habit of doing that. One specific area I would, target right away, I'd love to see pass, is to shut down their insider trading. Yeah. You see the headlines after COVID, these secret, these private meetings that leaders in Congress have, they get the inside scoop on what's coming, and coincidentally, they make a fortune buying and selling. Now, anyone else that did that would have years in jail. But time and again, they make things difficult for us to accomplish, but they exclude themselves. Pensions, insurance, investments, they have a bad habit of it, and I'd like to see them held to the same standards that they want the rest of us to be held to.
Okay, so I'm going to make an executive decision on something. There's a short video that that John Curtis has provided that we are going to play. But I want you guys, since you are here, to have the final word. And so we're going to do the video briefly. Hey, don't shoot the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. No. Hold up. Just a second. The executive decision is to allow them to have the last message rather than the video, which is what was going to happen. The video is not my decision. We're going to play the video, but I will have the last question be these folks because they are here in person. That's the executive decision I'm making. So we'll play the video real quick. Chase, I think, is who I was told to mention. Play the video. I believe it's 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will go back to these folks.
About 1 minute. No video.
Take a vote on the video.
Hi, as many of you know, I'm John Curtis, and I've had the honor to represent the 3rd Congressional District for a number of years now. And to be with all of you and represent you in Washington, D.C., and I want you to know that's been a highlight for me, the relationships we've been able to develop, the things we've been able to do together, especially in our pushback of the federal government. Well, as you know, I'm running for the Senate seat, and I regret that I can't be with you tonight to be in person. But if I were there, I would assure you of 2 things. The first is that the reason that I'm running for the Senate instead of the 3rd Congressional District is my absolute conviction that I can actually serve you better there. It's a different platform. It's a more powerful platform to continue to work on these gnarly issues of public lands and federal government overreach. And the second thing is I wouldn't do this if I wasn't absolutely confident that I wouldn't be able to continue to come into your communities at the same rate that I have for the last number of years. And I'll make you a commitment that you'll continue to see me and my team will continue to show up and be there for you. And we won't forget the great relationships and the important things that we're working on. As you know, we've had some great success with public lands. I'm proud to say I've transferred more federal lands to state ownership than anyone in the state's history. That protects grazing, that protects outdoor recreation, off-road enthusiast use, and so many other things that all of you want to make sure that we're able to do on these lands, including extraction and grazing and the other ways that so many of you depend on this land for income. I also want you to know that I'll continue to push back on the narrative that our natural resources are somehow part of the problem, and instead continue to make my point that they're part of the solution. And I'm absolutely convinced that we can guide this country into the future, not just with energy independence, but energy dominance in many ways, dependent on what we have here, the natural resources that we have here in Utah. I'm working hard. I currently vice chair the Energy and Grid Security Subcommittee, and we're working one of our biggest priorities. One of my biggest priorities is permitting reform, because as you well know, that's holding us back in so many different capacities. Also, I'm spending a lot of my time on other issues that are very important to you, spending, and I continue to vote against these outrageous spending bills, and more important than that, continue to look for ways that we can actually flatten and then turn down our spending curve. As you all do in your homes, you do in your cities and your counties, we need to do the same thing in Washington, D.C. Listen, I know my time is up. Once again, I'm sorry that I'm not with you. I trust you know that I care deeply about you and your issues, that I'll continue to make you and your issues my top priority in Washington, D.C. And I hope you'll reach out to me if you have any questions, and I hope to see you all very soon. I'm John Curtis, and many of you know me as the guy who has been serving in the 3rd Congressional District.
Well, like I said, out of respect to all of you who were able to be here in person, I wanted you all to have the last word rather than ending on the video. So that's why I wanted to interject the video beforehand. And I don't want, there's a couple more questions, but what I want to afford all of you to do rather than one last question, and Josh, you are next up, so we'll start with you. We're going to give you the entirety of your minute to talk about whatever issue is important to you. So it's your closing statements of sorts. What is something that you feel these delegates need to be aware of as they're making their consideration that should entice them to consider you as a candidate? And again, we'll start with you, Josh, and then back to Brad and on down the line.
Well, we need some major changes right now. And it's not easy to make major changes. I guess what I would say is what makes me different is, I mean, as a CPA, obviously I'm focused on the budget. And I do believe that a lot of what we need to do right now in this country revolves around our problem living within our means in Congress. And I have a plan to do that. I have a plan specifically lined out how to privatize Social Security and privatize Medicare and move Medicaid and food stamps back to the states to eliminate and send everything else back to states. I'm very much a constitutional candidate who believes in a defense, court system, post offices, and postal roads. Everything else you eliminate, you privatize, or you send back to the states. And I tell you, it's a different type of voice I have. I really believe in having someone on the Senate floor who can articulate well how to make those financial changes, constitutional changes that are going to make the major cultural shift. It means we might lay off 1 to 1.5 million federal employees. I understand that's not an easy change, but I believe it. I believe we can do it. I'm one who will give my whole heart and soul for 12 years to doing that, to getting us that cultural change. We can do it.
Thank you, Josh. Well, what an honor to be here today. And I just want to end with this. About 18 months ago, I got called to a breakfast meeting with the folks like Stuart Adams and now Speaker of the House, Mike Schultz, and some others. And they basically said, Brad, we think you should run for the US Senate. You understand this state better than almost anyone else. And you've proven that you're a good leader. You've proven that you're a strong conservative, and you've proven that you can make a big difference. And to be quite frank, my plan was to go back to my business. I've got a small business that I love. It's a great thing to do, but we ultimately made the decision to run. And the reason is this: Utah deserves, Utah needs to have someone that is proven and tested and trusted to go back to Washington and help fix this country's biggest problems. And they are massive. We've got to make sure that we infuse Utah values, Utah grit, and Utah wisdom into the process. And that is exactly what I intend to do as a conservative, to go back and fight for you and make a big difference to get this country where it needs to be. Thanks for the invitation.
I'm here because I woke up one morning and I couldn't take it anymore, not one more day. I'm here because our bloated federal government has been violating and blaspheming the sacredness of our Constitution, and they are literally robbing and selling your and my grandchildren's birthrights, near as I can tell, to our enemies abroad. And it's not right. If we don't stand up now, where are we going to be in 5 years? Where are we going to be in 7 years? So we not only have to have a balanced budget, we need to do it quickly. We need to do it immediately. Why? Why are career politicians constantly playing political games with my future, with your future, and with the future of your children? What are we leaving them? What are we leaving to our children, our grandchildren? This isn't a game. The border needs to be closed. It needs to be closed now. End catch and release, implement the stay in Mexico policy, and eliminate all incentives for people coming here to be first-class citizens instead of illegal immigrants. I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for considering me, and I want to promise you, if you elect me to the U.S. Senate, you will be going to Washington with me. I will be going and doing and saying all the things that you wish were being said and done if you were there.
Too often we elect really good people to represent us who are very easily fooled by the establishment narrative, coming oftentimes out of institutions paid for and funded with our tax dollars, by the way, and that work to undermine everything that we love and care about. I have worked with our political leaders in this state for many years, a whole bunch of them, and I will tell you, every time they talk about the greatness of this state, I make sure that the next words out of my mouth are, this state is great because of our families, because of the stability of our families that are founded and based in a belief and faith in God. And we have to be, by the way, a whole lot more willing to say it. It is those principles that have made this nation what it is. It is those principles that have made this state what it is. And we need people who aren't running from that idea, trying to fit in with whatever those narratives are that they're being fed, and people who understand fundamentally what it is that makes this state and nation what it is. I have been behind the scenes doing that hard work because I care about the world that we leave to my children, your children, and all of our grandchildren, if I ever have some someday. Thank you.
I'm grateful for this, this meeting. They handed out to us, I don't know if they handed it to all of you, that the effect of Christ on humankind. Brutality reigns where Christ is banished, kindness and forbearance govern where Christ is recognized and his teachings are followed. Judge Bork turned me onto a book when I clerked for him. It was by Richard John Newhouse, a theologian. It was called The Naked Public Square. And in this book, he made the case that under the First Amendment, when people were pushing religion and God out of the public square where discourse happens, what comes in? You got a vacuum, evil, bad comes in. I've kept in my book during the Constitution of the United States in one pocket, and in the other, a quote by Bastiat, and I think it sums it all up. It says, when misguided public opinion honors what is despicable and despises what is honorable, punishes virtue and rewards vice, encourages what is harmful and discourages what is useful, applauds falsehood and smothers truth, under indifference or insult, a nation turns its back on progress and can be restored only by the terrible lessons of catastrophe. God needs to be back in the public square. We need to do what's right and moral. We need to live by the Constitution. That's why I keep it in my pocket.
So Brian, you have 1 minute to share any remarks you'd like to share with the state delegates here.
Good to have you here. I'm a little frazzled because I've been driving like a maniac trying to get here. But anyway, nice to see you. Nice to be here. Thank you for your service to America. And if I may say, the thing that I think is so significant right now is that we're in a battle right now as to whether or not you are going to be able to select your representatives. In my opinion, maybe I'm the only one here that thinks that the voting is a little unsure. The FEC chair said the 2020 election, he wasn't sure that it was legitimate. And there are some other people who think that. I think that. So if there's anyone who can make a difference, it's back to the people as to whether or not we're going to have elections that are not electronic at the convention. There will be electronic voting unless you can stop it. Thank you very much.
If you asked me a year ago if I was running, no. Wasn't on my mind, not on the mind of my wife. But 5.5 years ago, Mitt Romney came here and he said, elect me as your next senator. I'm going to fight for you every day, balanced budget, end illegal immigration, stop federal spending overreach, confirm conservative justices. Not his record. I'd had enough. And then when I was asked to chair the Salt Lake County GOP organizing convention last March, every other member of the federal delegation shows up. Mitt Romney says, I'll yield my time. To the 1,200 delegates, that was it for me. I said, enough is enough. Utah deserves another true constitutional conservative, another Mike Lee. I've had no equivocation, no problem saying who would I align myself more with. It's with Senator Lee. We need that. We need that in Washington. That's why I've gone out and sought the endorsements that I have with Senator Tuberville, with Kari Lake, with Rick Grinnell, Kash Patel, Mark Levin, Charlie Kirk, who will be coming out here April 23rd to do an event for us. Look, we've got to be able to get back there and work as America First constitutional conservatives. I'm going to add that to that group of 18 right now. We got to get to 25 plus. So we've got actually the majority within our own caucus. It's the establishment that's the problem. We have to have somebody who's demonstrated that ability to stand up to it, and I've done that. This was typified my career in business, and also with respect to my time as mayor. Go to TrentStaggs.com, please. As a convention-only candidate, again, I'm asking for your support. Thank you so much.
One of the things that's distasteful to me about politics is how negative it can be. But today, I'm leaving this meeting feeling very edified, and I hope you do too. In Congress, I think we have too many, I'm going to steal a line here, we have too many show ponies, not enough workhorses. But I think that today you've seen, I hope that this gives you hope that we have some good options to send back some workhorses to Congress. Choice is good in America. Choice is our strength, meritocracy, the ability to compete, to improve ourselves, to elect our leaders, to have some choices. You've got some tough choices ahead of you. I know you'll do a good job with it. As we head to convention, I'd appreciate your support. I believe that the American dream has worked for me. To be able to go from a coal miner's grandson, to gain a great education, to start a business, to start a family, and I want that to endure. I want my kids to know that this is a special nation, that it was inspired when it was set up, that it's guided by inspired documents. I want that narrative to continue. It's under threat. It's not a guaranteed narrative, and we need to protect it. And I'll work hard to protect it because it's worked for me. I put it into effect and it's worked, and I know it will continue to work as we live and abide by those principles.
Well, we've been asked a lot of questions up here. I have a question for you. Is your vote for sale? Are some of you considering how much I'm offering for your vote? Is that why you didn't reply? I want you to reply firmly, as if you're being judged by God. Is your vote for sale? No. No, it's not. And you know what? SB 54 has been terrible. First, it kept us from keeping out a candidate that we no longer wanted to represent us, like Bob Bennett. That was his original intent. Second, it divided the votes. So the conservative vote is divided, and if it goes on like this, the least likely is to win. But the third one is it's put a financial barrier. I tried to convince Phil Lyman not to go with signature gathering, but he said, well, we made his decision as a team. And he tried to do it through volunteers, and guess what? It's impossible. Nobody who's ever gone through SB 54 has done it through volunteers. So I urge you not to vote for any people that will be in the primary anyhow, but to vote for convention-only candidates. You haven't heard much from me trying to get you to vote for me, because what I've been doing is talking to convention-only candidates to try and get them to join the movement, and half of them have. They said, we will take up SB 54 to the Supreme Court if you vote for us at convention. And we're facing dozens or half a dozen people instead of just one other opponent. So that's I urge you to do on April 27th.
Thank you, Jeremy. So please join me in giving these folks a round of applause. Very much appreciate all of you state delegates being here. All of you candidates, thank you for the time. A couple of things that I would stress for you. There's two things that I want you to keep front and center on your mind. First off, the United States Constitution. Second off, the Republican Party platform. Those in tandem together and fidelity to those two things will prepare you to represent the people out here who deserve you to go back to Washington, D.C. and be who you told us you would be. That is what we ask from you as your potential constituents. Final thing I was asked to mention, to the room just to the south, if you go out into the foyer, there is another kind of space. Evidently, I haven't seen it, but it exists. You candidates are welcome to go there and mingle if there's any additional follow-up questions from any of you state delegates. But do keep in mind there's also going to be an Attorney General's forum that will be happening immediately, moderated by our dear Gail Ruzicka. So again, state delegates, thanks for all you do. Look forward to seeing you on April 27th.
Yeah, we're good.
So if you would actually stay in here so that you can hear the Attorney General candidates, I would appreciate that. And I'm so grateful to all of you. There are like 300 people here on this, 10 o'clock in the morning, plus all the people who are watching on Facebook Live right now. So we're gonna make a change here, and we ask that the Attorney General candidates please come forward and take place. And thank you to all of you.
Oh, hey, Rob. Good to see you.
Thank you. All of you there should feel so great about this. Look at the choices that you have.
Are you going to Liberty Farm?
With strictly
So with,
You're an outlet.
right there. You just put my plug in, or we don't have a Mac. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, this one right there next to it.
This actually is a Mac. My phone's
Oh, that is a Mac.
yeah, my phone. Yes.
Thanks for being here. Nice to speak to you. Thanks for coming.
I'll verify that for me.
It's further east.
It's absolutely.
My car's actually in my car. You might want to stuff. That's an Apple phone. It's a good gift for you. You got it. Walk into the last question and I heard the shutter shut down off and I said, it's like a good photo opportunity or when it's or Ryan Jenkins. Ryan. Yeah. Here we go. Go in. This has a lace, pledge, and pledge of allegiance with
Okay, cool.
That's from I use this as my recording device and audio, but I think when I'm also using it as my internet source, my laptop and energy from it. You'll be sitting here to the Attorney General's event as well?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, you got it.
It's too close, isn't it? So, okay, please, would all of you please take your seat? We need to start right now. Please, come back to your seats. And we can't start while people are visiting, so if you would come back to your seats and sit down. We've got some very, I mean, you were all excited and enthused about the last group, and we need to do the same thing again. Please, everybody, could you come back in? Could you please sit down so we can get started? And I apologize for all the people that are still out there, but we do need to get started. My name is Gail Ruzicka, and I am going to be the one that are going to be asking the questions. We're going to be the similar format as last time, but we have 4 people here. When we first were talking about doing this, and I'm with Utah Eagle Forum and Liberty Forum that are sponsoring this event today, when we mentioned that we were going to do the candidates for the Attorney General, there was so much enthusiasm about that. Because, you know, when we have as many races as we have now and all the people, the opportunity to be able to hear all of them together makes all the difference, as you just learned with the last group. Wasn't that amazing to be able to hear from everyone? And I'm so grateful for all of you that we have 300 people here today, you know, at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday. That is just absolutely wonderful to have all you delegates here. Just a little announcement about the group today. Frank Mylar was not able to be here today. You know, like all of these people sitting up here, he's an attorney, and attorneys have to go to court. And he just couldn't tell the judge he couldn't show up today. I don't think that would have gone over very well. So Frank couldn't be with us. So instead, he sent his wife Debbie. So Debbie knows what Frank wants. So we're just grateful that, well, I'm grateful she's still my friend, because I'm the one that suggested she had to come. And, but she's speaking to me, so that seems to have worked out. Anyway, so we're going to have the same format as before. We're going to ask the questions. We got the timer down there for all of you. Judy is the timer. She's got her hand right there. I will tell you, it's a little bit different because there's just 4 of you, so I will tell you as I ask you the questions how much time you have to answer it. What we will do is that when you can just each tell your own name. That's just it, because you're going to be timed here. So just we'll start. I need to look and you can see what where you guys sit down. Okay, so we're going to start with trans. And the first question that I'm going to ask today is, the Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer of the state. Could you share any experiences that you have had prosecuting crime and your experience in criminal defense? And you have 2 minutes for this one.
Thank you. Trent Christensen. I'm an America First candidate for Utah Attorney General. I'm a convention-only candidate. I'm a constitutional conservative. And I just say this at the start of every meeting I do. Part of what I want to do is go to Salt Lake and drain the Salt Lake swamp. Thank you. And it has to do with this. So let me give some background on me, and then I'll get into the question. Utah native, grew up here, grew up in Salt Lake, went to BYU Law School, graduated top 10% of my class, went back east, practiced complex business litigation, appellate litigation. But to your point, what I get out there to get actually in front of a court, when you're a young attorney, you want to get in front of the court as much as possible. I would take pro bono cases. And I tell this story, the first time I ever got in front of a court was with a case where these 2 parents had had the state come and take their children away at gunpoint, 9/11, and was claiming, well, based off an accusation of a former disgruntled employee, okay? This was an action, it wasn't criminal, but it was an action from the state against these parents. When that happens to you, okay, you have three options. You either go get an attorney that's gonna cost you about $20,000, okay? Or you're gonna do it yourself, good luck with that, or you're just gonna take it. And when you say this, that the Attorney General is the state's chief law enforcement officer, everybody knows that, but it does not make that person the state's attorney, it makes them your attorney against the power of the state when the state comes for you. Who's protecting your individual rights? That's the state Attorney General. And that's what I want to be as Attorney General. I haven't cut the time yet. How am I doing? Fine. Okay, I'm good. Judy says I'm fine. So when I came back to Utah, I took that legal experience and I became a CEO. And that's important in this race. Because a CEO does a lot of things. They make payroll, thank you. They hire, they fire, okay? I quadrupled resources in my company over 4 years. Why is that important to this question? Because there's 300 attorneys, litigators in that office, good ones, okay? And they don't need a 301st and a 302nd and a 304th litigator. They need an attorney general, someone who understands leadership, someone who knows how to take a vision, implement that vision into the office. And that's what I bring, and that's what I want to be as your next attorney general. Thank you.
Good morning, thank you for being here. I'm Rachel Terry, and as you know, I'm running for Attorney General. So let me give you my experience. I've been a practicing attorney for 20 years. I spent the first 8 years of my career at a private law firm, working on everything from coal mine operators to banking to representing individuals. And then I spent 2 years at the Utah Board of Education, and my prosecution experience was there. It was administrative prosecution, but it was prosecution nonetheless. When educators did something bad, I would investigate, and then we prosecute to take away their licenses. And these were difficult cases. And every single one of those cases where there was sexual misconduct with a minor, every single one of those involved social media, because that's how you access children without going through their parents. And that is why the social media issue is so important and personal to me, and also as a mother of 2 kids. They're 13, and every day they want to access these tools that I think are dangerous for them. And then I spent 7 years at the Attorney General's office working on civil rights cases. And they include things like the Lauren McCluskey case, if you remember that case involving a student that died, that was murdered on the college campus at the University of Utah. I represented the U. And so in my career, and now as the director of the Utah Division of Risk Management, I'm the head of an agency. It's a $200 million agency, 35 employees. We oversee the work of 40 attorneys and legal professionals. And these are cases where we work with the Department of Corrections, Utah Highway Patrol, the Department of Public Safety. I work on the issues that impact our law enforcement every single day. I work on law enforcement bills in the legislature. I work with the head of the Department of Corrections. In fact, this morning, I was working on a First Amendment religious liberties issue involving the Department of Corrections. So when I say that I'm a constitutional attorney, I'm not talking about it in the abstract. I mean, right now, today, I'm working on these issues. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Gail, I used to serve in the House of Representatives, and there was probably no more effective advocate up there for conservative causes than Gail Ruzicka. So thank you for the work that she's done work for the years. It's amazing. And Britt's up there as well. Thank you for what you do. I've been out of law school for now. I've been, an attorney for 25 years. So to summarize that in the criminal realm really quickly, let me just give you 3 examples of things that I've done. First of all, after I graduated from law school, I clerked for the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, which is all the appeals from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware. We had a lot of criminal cases that came through. Sentencing reform was really tricky. We even had a case on 9/11. We were scheduled to hear an appeal of the bomber of the World Trade Center in 1992. Remember that it was bombed in 92? Well, that appeal was scheduled to be heard that morning, and so I had the judge all prepared for all of the criminal issues involved with that, and of course it didn't get heard that morning, as you can imagine. I later served in the House of Representatives. I spent a lot of time on the Law Enforcement and Judicial Committee, and on that committee we did a lot of things involving First Amendment work. I actually sponsored and wrote a bill dealing specifically with First Amendment freedom of speech issues, and I worked with the sheriffs and the Sheriff's Association to get that passed, really to protect our counties and the county jails from a lot of the exposure that they had, particularly after one of the inmates had died. And I later served as a deputy chief of staff to Senator Mike Lee. And I left my position in the House of Representatives to work with Senator Lee because I felt so strongly about who he is. One of the things we worked on there, I spent a lot of time on criminal issues, policy issues involving sentencing reform. You may have heard of one of the cases where there was a guy that was sentenced to 58 years in prison for 3 different drug buys. And it showed the problems with the sentencing reform system. So we worked on that. So a lot of my experience has been not necessarily the litigation of this, but the policy, the vision, the direction, and ultimately that is what an attorney general does. Thank you.
Hi, again, I'm not Frank Myler. I'm Debbie Myler, his wife. I will do my best to represent him, and I am not mad at you, Gail, at all. But anyway, Frank had his first felony fraud trial when he was less than 2 years out of law school. He prosecuted other matters while he was at the Attorney General's office for over 12 years. He handled criminal appeals and criminal board of pardon writs. He actually obtained his concealed weapon permit when you had to show cause because prisoners didn't like his aggressive style. When he was legal counsel for the Department of Corrections as a special attorney general, he worked with the Department of Corrections and Adult Probation and Parole on numerous civil and criminal matters. He was the only attorney present from the Attorney General's office during the Taylor execution in 1996. So if there was any legal issue that needed to be addressed leading up to the execution, he was there to answer any of those questions. He has testified before the legislature on numerous correction and criminal bills over the years, while he was the Director of Legal Affairs and General Counsel for the Utah Department of Corrections, and even after that time. Over the past 24 years, Frank has been representing and working with sheriffs throughout this state. He taught attorneys at the Utah Prosecutors Conference several times, and for the last several years, he has also taught at the Utah Sheriff's Association Conference. Frank has substantial criminal justice experience that spans over 36 years of practicing law that will serve him and the state of Utah well when he becomes your next Attorney General.
So before I go to the next question, I do want to mention something. Besides the 300 people that were here today, this is on Facebook Live. So there are people, delegates all over the state watching it, and it will be available for you if you want to watch it again, but for you to share with other delegates and let them know, and for the candidates to share with their delegates if they want to watch this. And it will be available on Facebook. It's it's facebook.com/Utah Eagle, or just the Utah Eagle Forum Facebook page. So this is such a great opportunity that this really hasn't existed anyplace else to get be able to hear from everybody at the same time. So let's go out and share this so that all of the delegates will have the opportunity to hear what we're talking about today. So I'm going to go to the next question, and let's start with Rachel with this question. Please describe things that you have done to defend the pro-life issue and to protect unborn babies.
So as an initial matter, I want everyone to know I'm pro-life, I'm pro-Second Amendment, I'm pro-families. And the pro-choice that I support is that women get to choose to take care of their bodies, but they don't get to choose to terminate the lives of somebody else's body. And so thank you. This matters to me when I came to this issue, especially when I was pregnant with my twins. And when they were about 20 weeks old, there was an issue, and the doctor had said, you may want to consider terminating your pregnancy. But by that point, I knew these people. I'd felt them, I'd heard them, and I knew them. And the issue became not just an abstract pro-choice, pro-life, but it became a much deeper, more spiritual matter to me, because I knew those humans and I knew they deserved a chance to be here and to have a fighting chance to live. And so that is my mantra. That is what has guided my principles. And I will fight for those babies as your Attorney General, because they have a choice and it's their choice to live. And I will fight for that choice for babies all day, every day. And the work is right now in the state of Utah is to fight for the statutes that were passed, the trigger laws that were to prohibit abortion. And that is the law of the state of Utah. And one judge should not get to decide what the law of the state of Utah is. This is the work that I've been doing. Thank you. This is the work that I've been doing my entire career, is the rule of law. And the rule of law is what you decided it should be by electing your representatives. And I will fight to uphold that as your Attorney General.
Thank you, I appreciate that. One of the issues that I talk about all the time is the federal overreach. The fact that Congress isn't necessarily passing laws, it's the mid-level government bureaucrats who are regulating it. Let me give you an example as it deals with the pro-life issue. At HHS, there's a statute called EMTALA, and what mid-level bureaucrats at HHS have recently done is said that that statute should override Idaho's law. They passed trigger laws like ours here, post-Dobbs. And then HHS basically made the argument that their law should trump what happens in Idaho and override that rule there. Now, this is a pro-life issue. This is also an issue of regulators who are going way beyond what it is that they should do. The Supreme Court, by the way, pulled that back, and I'm thrilled that they did that. I mean, if there's three things that Biden can't undo that Trump did, it's Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. And so, I mean, honestly, and this is one of the reasons that I think the Dobbs case was so critical, is because it set the issue back to really where it should have been all along, as to letting the states figure these things out. Now, I am completely and totally pro-life, and I don't have time, it looks like, to get into some of the really kind of personal, emotional issues that my wife and I went through a number of years ago. But we're pro-life as a family, we're pro-life in terms of politics, and I believe that the Utah law is a good law, and I will defend it. If you remember, we did have an attorney general about 25 years ago, and she refused to defend Utah's law on this issue, and that's not what an attorney general should do.
Frank is undoubtedly pro-life and pro-family. He defended sidewalk counselors who were peacefully talking to women about abortion alternatives outside an abortion clinic. They were being prosecuted in Salt Lake City. He took it to trial and he ultimately won and didn't charge them for defending them. Pro-Life Utah and the Pregnancy Resource Center call him on a regular basis. Once Pro-Life Utah called when they had a woman who said she was planning on having an abortion unless she could talk with him that day. He dropped what he was doing and he sat with this woman and answered her questions until 7 o'clock that evening, just to help her to understand her legal options. By God's grace, she decided to not abort, and she kept that child. In addition, just last summer, Frank filed a brief in support to the Utah Supreme Court of our pro-life laws. He did not charge for his services. He is, as I said earlier, he is unabashedly pro-life and he will do whatever it will take to protect the unborn.
I think I want Debbie to answer my question. Doing an excellent job. I am 100% pro-life. I'm pro-family. I'm pro-adoption. I'm pro every component that needs to be a part of this discussion. And I bring that up because I use this phrase, and sometimes it's a little cheesy, but it's attorney general. And we're not electing an attorney litigator or an attorney soldier. We're electing an attorney general. General implies a level of leadership, of vision, of being able to see around corners. And let me give you an example as it relates to this question. Roe v. Wade, was repealed, right? And it was sent back to the states. That was the result of decades of strategy, right? That didn't just happen. That was several different organizations, private organizations, state AGs, okay, that put together a strategy, put one case in this federal court, one case in that federal court, and then we lose here, we go up there, okay? And now we have a different argument. This state has that argument. And they're working together on a strategy to get it to the court, but you have to do it at the right time. If you take the case up to the court and there's a 5-4 liberal majority, you lose, right? You have to wait for the 5-4 or 6-3, even better majority at the Supreme Court. And I bring that up to say that there's a strategy involved here, and there has to be strategies around every part of this, and one of those is judicial reform.
It was mentioned earlier with the trigger law. There was a judge that tried to knock that down. You know why judges can do that? Because nobody looks over their shoulder to see if they're doing the job, if they're following the Constitution. I'm the one candidate in this race that's been talking about judicial reform to make sure our judges are following the law. It relates to trigger laws, it relates to red flag laws, it relates to all the laws, but it also relates to this one. We need to be pro-adoption. We need to be pro everything that relates to this, and that's what I'll be as your Attorney General. Thank you.
So the next question that we have is, please, well, I'm going to skip that one. Okay, so every candidate in this race has a varying type of experience in the law. Talk about your legal experience and why it specifically qualifies you to be our next Attorney General.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. So my legal background is I practiced law with two of the largest firms in the country, doing a lot of litigation work. We filed briefs with the Supreme Court. We did pro bono cases. I spent time, as I mentioned, working with a federal judge. I mean, if you really want to know how the courtroom works, go behind the courtroom. We don't have a PhD in the legal arena, but that's as close as to a PhD in the law, it really as you can get. And I practiced law here in Utah, and a lot of my legal background stems from then using that to help on policy issues. When I was in the legislature, I spent a lot of time, I was on the Judiciary Committee, which spends a lot of time working on some of those tricky, emotional legal issues on everything involving pro-life to crazy things. We had a bill involving shooting feral cats, I mean, and everything in between. And I brought that legal background to that position. That's one of the reasons that I have spent time working with Senator Lee. And then I've also spent a lot of time the last 6 or 7 years working with private clients, helping them solve legal issues, helping them solve issues at the state legislature, helping from a lobbying standpoint. I mean, do you think that the federal government is the only government that overreaches around here? Does the state government overreach?
Yes.
Absolutely. And when they overreach and try to shut your business down, you better darn well have a good advocate who can go up there. I had a client called Turo, for instance. It's the peer-to-peer car sharing. How many of you use Turo? Well, there was a bill specifically trying to shut the industry down. They were a client of mine. They said, hey, what can we do? I spent a lot of time working and advocating and lobbying with the legislature to help them understand free market principles need to carry the day here in Utah. And in the end, they did. So I have brought that legal background from all of those areas to these realms, and that's what I will use to help set vision, policy, and help manage as your next Attorney General. So thank you.
Frank has a wide variety of cases that he's covered over the last 36 years. His whole legal career has been here in the state of Utah. This is important because there are so many different types of cases that are covered by the Attorney General's office. Over the years, he represented an airline. He's represented the creators of Monster, Inc. in a fight against an employer. He has handled numerous juvenile court cases in addition to an extremely wide variety of constitutional claims. He's had numerous jury trials, including one right now that is keeping him from being here. He has had numerous support court arguments and 10th Circuit Court of Appeals arguments. As the Attorney General's office is supervised attorneys not only in the Attorney General's, as in the Attorney General, as it's the largest legal firm in the state, he will have to supervise approximately 600 employees. He has supervised attorneys not only in the Attorney General's office, but also in his private law firm. He got an MBA in 1989 and has relied on that expertise in managing his own successful law firm for the past 24 years. God has blessed this law firm. He has never advertised, but always had way too much work to do. When he decided to run for AG, he tried to give away as many of his cases as he could, but he still has some big cases that he has to finish, which he is doing right now. Even as he is continuing to campaign all over the state. On a more personal note, he has helped coach a lot of kids' sports over the years. He is known as an encourager to help people perform well. He plans to carry this over to his role as your next Attorney General and he will supervise and encourage his employees to do their best work.
So again, practice complex business litigation, appellate litigation, pro bono litigation, protecting parental rights. But let me tell you something. Last week when I went and met with the Fraternal Order of Police, and the week before that when I met with the county sheriffs, not a single one of them asked me this question. Tell me about your litigation experience. Every single one of them looked me in the eye and they said, what are you gonna do? Because I can tell you all about the cases that I've had, in this case, in that case, and that's great. And I'll tell you what, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, the first 3 hires I'm gonna make are the people sitting at this table, because they have incredible litigation experience and incredible background. But what's the vision, okay? How is the world gonna be a different place because any one of the 4 of us are your attorney general? So I sat with the Fraternal Order of Police and I said, this is what I'm going to do. This is my strategy. I told them what I want to do with election integrity to make sure that your votes count and nobody else's votes count. I told them what I want to do to support law enforcement, which essentially means unleash them and allow them to do their job and prosecute the crimes that they're trying to enforce. And I said, this is what we're going to do to support and secure our border. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to use that entire army of 300 litigators to do it. If you think that I'm going to go, or any one of these people is going to go and be involved in every single one of those cases, that's ridiculous, okay? You need to be able to speak their language, but you have to direct resources. The Attorney General has finite resources, and the purpose of the general is to allocate and prioritize resources based on winning an ultimate goal. That's what I'm going to do. And those goals are threefold: election integrity, support law enforcement, and secure our border. That's what I'm going to do.
I think of this process with you as the delegates as a job interview. And I wish we could all sit around a table like I did with the delegates from Woodland Hills, and you could interview me. Because here's what I would share with you. I am a Utah lawyer who has been practicing Utah law in Utah courts for Utah clients for 20 years. And that matters, because guess what the Attorney General's office does? It represents Utah clients in Utah courts with Utah lawyers under Utah law. This week I sent delegates a list of my cases just from the federal court so you could actually see my record, because I think you should look at my record, not the rhetoric, look at the record. And my record will show you that I'm the most qualified, and it's because I have all the experience necessary to be an excellent Attorney General. I have the legal experience. I've been in court applying Utah law. That will not be new to me. And I've worked on some of the most difficult, heavy, hard cases that this state has ever seen. We're talking about people dying. We're talking about the constitutional rights being violated. This is the kind of work the Attorney General's office does. And the people who do that work in the office know me, trust me, and have endorsed me, including Brian Tarbett. He was a former Adjutant General of the Utah National Guard. He is now the Civil Chief Deputy for the Attorney General's office. He is over the 300 attorneys and legal professionals who advise the state and work on the civil litigation. He endorsed me because he has seen what I can do, and he knows what the job takes. I've also been endorsed by Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General, because he knows that I will fight for states' rights. But it's not just enough to know the law. You also have to have leadership experience, which I have. I'm currently the head of an agency with a $200 million budget, 35 employees, and I work with the Attorney General's office every day. This morning, as I shared with you, working on a constitutional right issue. And I think the best situated Attorney General is someone who has passion for this work. I love it. What I do right now is very similar to what an Attorney General will do. I work on legislation. I work on policy. I work with the lawyers. I oversee lawyers. They know me, they trust me, and they know that I care about making sure your rights are protected. Thank you.
Next question. Please provide an example of what you would do to push back against federal overreach in your administration if you were Attorney General.
So Frank is already involved in fighting federal encroachment on lands in eastern Utah. He filed a brief with the Supreme Court last week to fight federal overreach and control of our lands. He believes, however, that federal overreach is not just a land issue. Another example is that he would fight to kick out the Department of Justice from trying to manage and control the Davis County School District in sexual assault and confusion issues. This is an issue that is going on right now in Davis County. He also believes there are a myriad of ways other than lawsuits to fight the feds, including encouraging the legislature to pass bills as a pushback against the feds. Frank has been passionate about protecting ranchers for decades. He helped ranchers in southern Utah over 20 years ago to protect their right to graze on federal lands. He will continue to do whatever he can as your next Attorney General to push back against federal overreach in Utah.
The number one thing that has to happen in this arena is that we need to have Donald J. Trump as our next president. That's the number one biggest thing. And I've been endorsing him. I endorsed him on January 16th. We need him as president, not just for this issue, for many issues. But for example, right now, there's been over the last couple of years, about 60 cases filed by Utah against the federal government that are working their way through federal courts, okay? And these aren't just, we use the phrase public lands, that's an umbrella phrase. It means a lot of things. It means grazing rights. It means water rights. It means access to public lands, okay? The dirt tourism we have in this state, Moab, Zion, that is worth more revenue to this state than what we get from skiing, right? The federal government's kind of trying to come and take that away. Okay, so the next Attorney General has to be ready to prosecute those cases. But I'll give you a very specific example. When you're talking about the timeline of when the government takes our lands away, okay? When it actually happens, that's the end of the problem, okay? There was 100 steps that had to happen for them to get to that legal step of actually taking the rights away. And my question is, where's the Attorney General in these steps, right? Back here, I had a 2-hour conversation with a man in Escalante who said the feds are coming and they'll hold these hearings. They do it with 24 hours notice because they don't want you to show up. And the only people that can object to the rules that they're going to propose in these hearings are state officials. So lots of private citizens go, and they talk about the rules they want to lay down, and they say, any objections? And people are screaming to high heaven. There's no state officials in the room. And so they say, okay, roll past, we're out. And that's the first loss. Okay, you just lost right here. And then there's another step, and another step, and another step. This is a process. It's a legal process, and it goes a very long way until they actually have all the things they need, all the legal precedent they need to take the land. And when they do that, now you're behind the 8 ball. So we need an Attorney General that's going to fight those fights. Rudy Giuliani back in the 80s had what he called the broken windows policy. He said, I'm going to prosecute every broken window, every vandalism, every broken car, and he was able to turn that city around. We need an Attorney General that's going to do that as it relates to public lands. He's going to do that as it relates to drug trafficking, criminal trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking. Going to be there at the beginning, prosecute it, and make sure it doesn't metastasize into something bigger.
You'll hear every candidate in every race this year talk about federal overreach. And it's because we've hit a critical point where if we don't turn it around now, all these things are going to be lost. And I agree with Trent that the first thing that we need to do is elect Donald Trump as the President of the United States. That's first step, and it's critical. When I talk about federal overreach, I want to be very specific with you because again, I want to talk about specifics. I want to talk about the record, not just the rhetoric. There are 3 areas which are particularly critical. It's in public lands, it's in energy, it's in education. And these are things that I've been working on. I deeply care about what's happening in public lands because it is about the grazing rights, but it's also more than that. If we lose our grazing rights in Garfield, in Kane, in San Juan, those ranchers, they disappear. Ranchers disappear. The businesses that support them disappear. The communities that support all of those employees disappear. And then what do we have? We lose the culture, the heritage, the economy, and what else? We lose a food source. Utah has all the things we need to be completely self-sufficient. We have all the energy, all the agriculture, all the education that we need. When I talk about education, I have worked extensively with schools and universities on federal issues, specifically Title IX. The Biden administration changed Title IX without any act of Congress or anything else to change it. The statute itself says you cannot discriminate in education on the basis of sex. You change the definition of sex to include gender identity. And so now it's not what it was. And then in energy, there are layers upon layers upon layers of rules that have made us less energy independent, that have, including, they want to say a dry creek bed is the water of the United States. Like, that's just ridiculous. And then cases that I'm actually working on, the Department of Justice is coming in and trying to tell our Department of Corrections how to handle transgender issues. This is a complaint that came from a person who's in prison for sexually assaulting women. And this is the kind of federal overreach we need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. So in the midst of all this gloom and doom, can I tell you something that actually excites me, something that makes me really happy? So about, almost 30 years ago when I was in law school, I learned about a concept in the legal system called Chevron deference. What that is a concept where courts basically look at agencies and effectively let them do whatever they want to do. They basically say to an agency after it's taken a regulation and just gone to town and done things Congress never anticipated that they would do. And they say to the agency, do you think you ought to have done that? Do you have a good reason for that? And the agency always says what? Of course we do. We've got a really good reason. And then the courts respond by saying, oh, well, you're the experts. I guess we'll let you do that. Well, this concept has driven me nuts for 30 years. And there was a case in the Supreme Court right now, and if you want to Google it, Loper-Bright is the case. It was heard in oral argument just a couple of months ago. And I was recently talking with Senator Lee, and he and I are so excited about this, we can hardly stand it. If this case gets overturned, Chevron deference changes, and what it does is all these topics about federal overreach, the courts then will be on our side, not the regulator's side. You see, Congress is not really passing substantive legislation. You've seen that. They don't have to pass a Green New Deal. They don't have the votes. They're not going to. But the Biden administration has what? They have the EPA that is doing it for them, which is why just 3 weeks ago you saw the EPA say to all the auto manufacturers in the country, by 2032, you need to convert your fleets, 2/3 of them, to hybrid and electric. This was a major policy shift. And who did it? Mid-level government bureaucrats who are unaccountable and going outside, I would argue, the realm of responsibility and authority they have under regulation. If Chevron is overturned, which I am hoping it is, there will be hundreds of lawsuits that we will file. They will not just be on lands, they will be on energy, they will be on education, they'll be on every one of these issues. I worked on these issues for years when I was in Senator Lee's office. And we would always lose in these cases because of Chevron deference. If this changes, my friend, this is the single biggest case of the year that you probably haven't heard of yet. And so we will find out probably the first or second week of June. So stay tuned. But if that goes the way that a conservative jurist like me hopes it goes, we will have a lot of work to do in the Attorney General's office.
Back here to Trent. Let's start with Trent again. Okay, next question is, tell us about a specific legal case you worked on that you think will benefit the state.
Let me tell you what I'm gonna work on. When I met with the Fraternal Order of Police, I said to them, here's my strategy for securing our border. And they said, okay, which border are you talking about? I said, our border, Utah's border. We have a border and it's our job to secure it. They kind of sat back in their chairs like, okay, let's hear this guy out. Let's hear what he has to say. They said, here's my strategies. We're gonna do this, this, and this. I need you now to tell me if I'm crazy on any of these things. And they kind of laughed. They said, hey, that's the first time a politician's ever said that to us. Please tell me if you're crazy. But they all think they have all the answers, right? But they said, B, this one's pretty good, that one's pretty good, but tell me about this one. And we got into that. We started to strategize. This is how we're gonna do these things. And I said, here's, from a legal standpoint, what I want to have happen. And we were talking about fentanyl and regulating it. And I give you the example of, look, in American Fork, what was it, just last week? There was an illegal immigrant that was detained with 30 pounds of fentanyl on it, the big wad of cash, right? I said, we need to go after that. I said, Trent, hold on. We can't get the Attorney General's office or anybody to prosecute when we pull over someone with 2 or 3 pills, okay? That's what we need to be going after. That's the root problem. And I said, now that's interesting what you said. You said that's the root of the problem. That's what the Attorney General needs to do, is get together with them and strategize and hear what's the root. Because sheriffs aren't going to tell their deputies, go put your lives on the line and enforce this law. When you see 2 or 3 pills, you have to let them go. You know those pills are going to kill somebody, but you have to let them go. We need to have an Attorney General that's going to fight with the police and work with them to come up with these strategies and fight. And several of my strategies, just so you know, are intended to get the federal government to sue us, because then we, like Texas, can go and fight the fight in federal courts and protect our border and make sure we're doing it the right way. That's what I want to do, is build strategy with the police, not just let people go free with their fentanyl.
As I mentioned, I've been an attorney for 20 years and spent most of that time litigating Utah cases for Utah clients in Utah courts. This work matters to me. The 7 years I spent in the Attorney General's office, I did everything from handling a $1 billion trade secret case for Utah State's Space Dynamics Lab that does amazing work that benefits the state of Utah, to representing the University of Utah in the Lauren McCluskey case, to representing school districts in Title IX cases. You can actually look at my record, not just listen to my rhetoric. You can look at my record and see the kind of work that I've done. In addition to doing that work, I have represented clients pro bono. I'm representing a woman right now, an elderly woman who's been completely exploited by a solar company, fighting that case. I started a program to provide free trusts in the states and wills for law enforcement officers. I have an actual record of doing this work. I want to share with you one case, though, that has particular meaning to me. It was a difficult case where a woman had been sexually assaulted on a college campus. As we worked on the case, we ultimately concluded there were a lot of issues with proceeding with litigation. And it was in the best interest of the client and in the best interest of the plaintiffs to reach a solution. And we settled that case. But we didn't just write a check and walk away. The university, I worked with the university very closely to actually change policies to make that campus safer. And I'm proud of the fact that I've stood up to make this state better every day as I represented you and represented my clients in court. Thank you.
Thank you. When I was first elected to the House of Representatives, one of my good friends who was elected at the same time as me was named Ken Ivory. And Ken and I spoke for weeks on end about the issue of federal overreach, specifically dealing with lands. And rather than talking about one specific case, let me talk about what we did that authorized multiple lawsuits. I mean, this is a policy issue of overreach and conceivably every area. But one of the things that we did as a legislature is we authorized, we funded, and then we facilitated lawsuits that are still going on. And then there's a big one dealing with the federal disposition of lands. And hopefully you've been following that. This is going to be, I mean, this is an Attorney General case that is going to be one of the biggest sort of addressing this issue. And one of the reasons it's being filed now is we have what I believe is a window of time, a brief window of time. We have what I think is probably the most conservative Supreme Court of our lifetime. Now, maybe not, hopefully I'm wrong, but I'm probably right. And on that note, this is the time when we need to file these suits. This is what the Attorney General does. When I worked with Mike Lee, then we took that to the next level, and I actually hired someone specifically on our staff whose job it was to work on this issue and no other issues. And he and I spent a lot of time working with county commissioners, preparing for getting information to help with all the lawsuits. And right now, the state has over 50 or 60 rather lawsuits dealing with federal lands and dealing with how we can take them back, how we can push back on the Antiquities Act, which really is to be repealed. If you were here for the last debate with the Senate candidates, we need to get rid of the Antiquities Act. And it looks like my time is up.
During COVID, Frank sued the ACLU when they were trying to take control of the county jails. The ACLU wanted to have some of the prisoners released, claiming that criminals would be safer if they were released. He represented all the county jails in the suit except for Salt Lake County, and won at the Utah Supreme Court by proving that they were actually safer in the prisons than outside, where they would be exposed to more possibilities of contracting COVID. In addition, he's handled the Highway Patrol Association's crosses case a number of years ago. As you know, there are crosses placed for officers along the highways in Utah when they lost their lives in the line of duty. These crosses are still standing, even though there was an attack by the American Atheists to get them removed. This is important because it gives Utahns the right to memorialize troopers who died in the line of duty. Again, he didn't charge for this work. He sued Rocky Anderson, the mayor of Salt Lake City, when he tried to make domestic partnerships by executive order. He was able to get these actions reversed. In the 2007 Jones versus Barlow case, he argued before the Utah Supreme Court and was able to establish that a natural parent has constitutional rights to her child absent any adjudication of abuse or neglect. Again, he did this free of charge.
So the next question is that, what is the most important legal issue facing the state?
The most important legal issue facing the state is federal overreach, because it is time sensitive and we've reached a critical point where we won't be able to reverse the damage that's being done to our economy, to agriculture, to access to our own public lands. And again, I want to be specific. We're talking about public lands, energy, and education, where like this executive order that's changing the meaning and definition of sex in athletics. This will fundamentally change competition for girls and women in education and in athletics. I have a daughter who's 13, and she has a twin brother who's 13. And when they were 8 years old, she could beat him up all day, every day, and she did. She still tries. He's nicer than her. Oh shoot, this is recorded. Don't watch this, Avery. Don't watch this. But now, when they play, he is stronger. They're 13. And this is also critical too. And the federal government's trying to tell the state of Utah where your girls can play sports, where you can drive your side-by-side, how you can access your food. What is safety for you in the state of Utah? This is unacceptable. I will fight it all day, every day, and I actually have the experience to do it. One of the other issues that is critical to the Attorney General's office, because this is a technical position, you need someone who's actually been doing the work. It's not just hanging out and letting other attorneys do it for you. You're in the weeds with them. They rely on you to consult on precedents, on cases, those that have statewide implications, and I will do that with them.
Thank you. When I worked with Senator Mike Lee, we have in the DC office, I don't know if any of you have ever been in the DC office, he has this cabinet. When you walk in, it's about this big, maybe this tall. On the top, we have all the bills that were passed the previous year by Congress in the Obama administration. This was like 2015. About 600 pages. Inside the cabinet, we have all the new agency regulations that were issued in the same period of time. More than 600 pages. Actually, it was 60,000 pages. And these cover everything from EPA regulations that shift industries to minor things. I mean, 20 years ago, Congress gave the Department of Energy an authorization for something as like controlling faucets and shower heads. And 2 years ago, the Department of Energy said, we think that also involves dishwashers. And so they created this dishwasher rule, which manages, how much water dishwashers can use. And as silly as an example as that sounds, this is one more example of the federal government not just injecting itself in Utah in land and energy and education and that sort of thing, but things as simple as that. So this overreach issue, it's something that was the #1 issue I worked on when I was in Senator Lee's office. He knows where I stand. There's a reason Senator Lee endorses me in this race, and it's because he knows that I have the background and I've been doing this for many years. And then the interesting thing, by the way, as a side note, on the dishwasher rule, it just got overturned in court. Do you know why? A group of attorneys general filed suit making the argument that it exceeded their statutory authority, and a judge agreed. And so that's what an attorney general does, is you fight it that way, and you also create and build coalitions of other attorneys general across the country to do the same thing. There are 28 Republican attorneys general, so that's what I will do.
Yes, Frank is going to fight immigration in the state and federal overreach, but he equally will fight this issue, and it's the issue that Rachel already mentioned. He is concerned about protecting girls' bathrooms and girls' sports. 3 of our 5 children are girls. They play sports all over the state. It's a very important issue for us. We currently have a law about this, but it has exceptions. He would fight to have no exceptions. There would be no boys in girls' bathrooms, and there would be no boys in girls' sports in the state of Utah. There were problems with the current bill, and there was no one in the Attorney General's office to give legal input. He would personally go down to the legislature and testify on what the Constitution allows in this area. In addition, he believes parents should be informed of sexual confusion issues from the school regarding their children. He believes that no one should be required to use pronouns that are inconsistent with a person's biological gender. The girls' bathroom and sports issue is a religious freedom issue. It's a privacy issue. It's a safety issue. And it's a common sense issue and must be fought without exceptions.
The number one issue facing our federal government and our state government is election integrity, period. If we don't have election integrity, if our leaders are selecting leaders instead of you electing them, then every other issue is academic. If Spencer Cox and Deidre Henderson can pick the people that are making your laws, then we will have a sanctuary state. We will have boys and girls sports. We will have all of those things without the election integrity. But here's one thing I know. There's one thing that the Attorney General can't do. Okay, I can't pass laws. In my opinion, our elections need to be on paper, in person, period, with a voter ID. That's it. But I can't just make that happen, right? I need you. And we need to go to the legislature and make that happen. But there's things that aren't working right now in our laws. I heard this, it was a little disheartening. One of the other candidates say, look, I'm gonna enforce all the election integrity laws. And what that tells me is you don't understand the enemy you're trying to fight, because our current election integrity laws are the problem. Our current laws on the books allow for mail-in ballots. Our current laws allow for the voting machines. Our current ballots allow for all the things that are allowing fraudulent votes into our elections. Those need to be taken away. So we need to have the data. Again, I've been a CEO. We need to have the data. We need to run the investigations, the audits, and enlist the auditor, get all the help we can to show what's happening, what's working, what's not working, who needs to go to jail. I'll give you one example really quick. I think I've got time. There's a company called Eric. Okay, some of you may have heard of Eric. They were hired by the state to clean our voter rolls, and study after study have shown that they make the problem worse. Not just that they're bad at their jobs, they're actively making it worse. But we're paying them to do that for us. The Attorney General can get involved there. And that's what I want to do. That's just one component, one slice of election integrity. So I'm telling you, without that, all of this goes away. If my kids can't elect their future leaders, and we allow that to be what it is, and we will see what we saw in the 2020 election again and again and again. And that's what I will work on.
You're ready for the.
New question, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I was beginning to doubt myself about the next question because, Trent, you just answered it. Wait a minute.
Election integrity, is it
Yeah,
by chance the next
Did
question?
I ask the wrong question? So here's the question.
Trent gets to repeat what he just said.
Yeah, or we could just rewind the video, but anyway. Next question, how do you define election integrity and what would you do to protect it in Utah?
Well, I'm kind of old fashioned. I like the idea of showing up in person and showing, heaven forbid, an ID when you vote. Call me old fashioned. By the way, this is like, we're talking about this a lot, and we should because it's a critical issue. I was working on this 20 years ago. I was part of the Republican National Lawyers Association, and I was stationed around the country during the 2004 Bush-Kerry election. And that one, I was in 2 different places. One of them on election day was Milwaukee. And on that day, I did 2 things. We monitored polls and saw the unions who were actually busing people from poll station to poll station and having them fill out provisional ballots at each one of those locations. And we got that stopped. And then the other thing we did is we watched them file motions with the court to keep open polling locations open after 8 p.m. when they closed. And of course, where were the locations that they were making motions to keep them open? In the most heavily Democrat areas. And so those are the kinds of, this is 2004. Now, when I served as the state chairman of the Republican Party from 2019 to 2021, this was my critical issue. People don't realize that yes, you fundraise, and yes, you help candidates get across the finish line, but how do you do that? You monitor elections. I had people in the Salt Lake County Clerk's office all the time, monitoring all the time, working on what we call the cure list. Why is there a cure list? It's because we have to compare signatures. I mean, if we had ideas that we showed up when we voted, whether we brought something in or we went in person, whatever the case is, the whole signature problem that we have would just go away. So one of the things I would love to see, I've worked with the legislature And no one will know the amount of time I spent as state party chair working specifically with members of the state Senate on elections law. The law is so long and so convoluted that it needs to be rethought from top to the bottom so that the county clerks know how to do it, because they also want secure elections. We aren't the only ones. Our elected officials want it. The Republicans in the House of Representatives and Senate here want it. We all want it. The question is, how do we get there?
Well, let's define it first. What is election integrity? Election integrity means that when you cast your vote, you're confident that it goes for the person you voted for. And no one is going to change it. And you can do a recount immediately, right? Later, an election can be audited. It also means that private companies will not be given this information by the state of Utah. One thing that Frank did was he asked for paper ballots at the state convention. He saw what happened at the caucuses in March, and it was a disaster, as many of you know. He believes that we cannot be so enamored with technology that we throw reason and trust to the wind. We need to radically change how we do absentee ballots, and we need to require, as our opponent said, a license and a voter ID every time, and every time an absentee ballot is sent out. Years ago, Frank requested an absentee ballot because we were going to be out of town. Ever since, he's received an absentee ballot every election. He would change this practice. We cannot allow electronic verification at this time. Frank will investigate and prosecute all instances of election fraud.
You might be surprised to know I have more to say about this. I would actually define it a little bit broader than that, okay? To me, election integrity, or the lack thereof, is any time that the government tries to take your voice away in any form, okay? That's not election integrity. And I'll give you an example. It's actually the reason I got in this race. It was last October, okay? There was an article in KSL that said that there was a Utah County legislator that proposed an idea that was backed by the governor, that they wanted to take the Attorney General's position and make it an appointment under the governor, okay? Now, why would you do that? You would do that because the Attorney General is the single most powerful check against every other branch and officer of government that you have, you the people have, okay? And thank you, but he got such blowback on that, okay, that he pulled back off the idea, they pulled back off of that, and they went a different direction. But here's what we saw in the last legislative session. A bill was introduced by a Utah County legislator to start the process of making not just the Attorney General, but the auditor and the treasurer, okay? Starting that process to make them appointments under the governor. He's already trying to do it with Utah State Board of Education. There's proposals to take the vote away on the county sheriffs, make that something that the county commissioners do. Every single time that happens, it takes your voice away. And so how do they get away with that? Well, you have the Lieutenant Governor proposing just last week, you know what we should do? We should have voting by phone. You pull out your phone, there you vote. And the point's valid. If you can't audit it, it didn't happen, okay? If you can't audit it, if it gets into the algorithm, it's gone. There's no chain of custody. You can't prove that that was your vote, okay? But that's the direction we're heading. When we say we want to go back to paper ballots, it's because that protects you. You can audit it immediately. And that's what we need to have. But you can't just go to the legislature and say, this is what we're doing, right? You have to have data. Again, that's what CEOs do. I've never been part of an organization, frankly, that didn't audit its books and then share that information with people that need to see it. Shareholders or board members, right? Government doesn't do that. They don't want you to see it. There's been attempts, public records requests to say, hey, we'd like to see the ballots. They say no, or get lost, or we'll sue you if you come back, or we'll charge you $100,000 for those ballots. That's something the Attorney General can get involved in, okay? And that fight has to happen. It's not part of the normal 9 to 5 that an Attorney General does, right? You can show up 9 to 5 and do your job and do it really well, prosecute crime. This is above and beyond that because it's the biggest issue of our time. And if we don't solve it, we will no longer have our state. Talk to me after.
Free and fair elections, I agree with what's been shared here, and I will echo especially what Frank had to say is making sure, well, written, what he had you say for him, is making sure that we have a process that is transparent, that can be audited, because it should be one person, one vote, and we need to be able to prove that. And the stories that I'm hearing from people across the state that have demonstrated to me that this isn't an abstract issue, this is a real issue that has to be addressed now. Because There are very few people that I've heard who have said everything's going great in elections. And in fact, the billboards that say elections are fine, they're doing awesome. Those always make me really nervous because every time someone says, don't worry about it, it's covered, I know that it's not. And so that is something that I want to address. But I also want to address something else. As a convention-only candidate, I did not gather signatures. I now appreciate how messed up our system is with the caucus and convention. Here are all of you listening to my words. I love seeing your notebooks, checking off boxes. You're really engaging with me in a deeply, deeply personal way that it does not happen in a primary. In the primary, it's whoever has the coolest commercials. And I hope that I have those in a primary. I will do my very best. But you're the ones who are engaging with me. You're the ones who are asking the hard questions. You're the ones who's showing up and looking at me in the eye to decide if I'm the kind of person you want to represent you. And that is the kind of system that we need to have, because that is a free and fair election. Because I know that you've done your homework, you vetted the candidates, and you've reached a reasonable and honest conclusion. And then to be able to go and vote and represent those conclusions matters. Not to have them superseded through signatures that for me to gather signatures would have cost me about $300,000. What that tells me is that we've got a money game and we have to eliminate that as much as we can from this process. Thank you.
One last question. What is the most important legal issue facing the state of Utah?
I think we did that.
Did we already do that one? Oh,
You can rewind the tape.
well, let's just rewind the tape then. No, see, it's your fault, Trent, because you, all messed up. Yeah, okay. Didn't I ask the question? Okay. Is legal immigration exclusively a federal issue, or what can the Attorney General do on that issue in Utah?
Frank already has a plan on how he will attack the illegal immigration issue in Utah. He plans to work with the legislature and the sheriffs to make it a felony to transport illegal immigrants by bus, by plane, or any other means into Utah. He believes that states need to shoulder the responsibility of protecting their borders because the feds are not doing their job and crime is increasing. Therefore, it has become a state issue because the federal government is not doing its job. He believes that transporters who would face felony charges would very quickly stop transporting illegal immigrants into our state because felony charges would shut their businesses down. He has had lots of experience interacting with the legislature, and because of his experience in criminal law, he would be able to lead this legal battle well for the state of Utah.
Thank you. It is absolutely a state issue. It's affecting our people and our communities, and we have everything in place right now, the laws and the resources to go and attack this problem and make sure that they know that Utah is close to business to them. And here's how I know that. I say often that the sheriffs, the Fraternal Order of Police, they are the tip of the spear, okay? The AG's office is the spear, and those have to work together. But here's what they don't trust, the law enforcement, okay? If you look at any of the flyers I have, my number one issue is election integrity. My second is support law enforcement. Because without that one, you don't get the third one, which is secure our border. They don't currently trust that if they go out and do their job and put their lives on the line, the Attorney General is going to have their back. I mentioned it earlier. I find somebody with 2 or 3 pills of fentanyl in his car, I have to let him go. So what we're going to do is we're going to strategize a plan. We're going to make sure that they know that I have their back. And one of the plans I told you that I sat down with them and I said, I want to do this, it was just that. We're going to enforce the Rudy Giuliani broken windows policy, but we're going to do it here as it relates to fentanyl, drugs, human trafficking, and child trafficking. We have all of those laws in place. The sheriffs have told me, we know where it's happening, we know when it's happening, we know when those bus loads are getting dropped off and those plane loads. We can go arrest them right now. But the sheriffs and the deputies and the Fraternal Order Police, all the police need to know that I have their back when they do that. We have those laws in place, we can enforce them, and here's what I told them. June 25th is the primary. I hope I win the primary. I think I will, okay? On June 26th, I'm gonna be back at this room and this table with you and the sheriffs, and we're gonna spend the next 7 months building out this legal strategy so that on January, when I assume office, we are gonna go to war. And everyone's gonna know if you wanna take your drugs from Mexico to Canada, you're gonna go around. That's what I'll do as your Attorney General.
Today I said that public lands, federal overreach is the #1 issue. I would say a very, very, very close second is immigration. And that's the exact opposite of federal overreach. That's federal underreach, right? It's like they're like, don't look over here, notice what we're doing over here. And this is a huge problem. But to suggest that we have everything we need to address it in state law would suggest that our sheriffs and our other local law enforcement just aren't getting the job done. And they are. Your Utah County Sheriff, Mike Smith, had addressed this specifically. Anytime anybody, no matter their immigration status, is breaking the law, he's going to arrest them, he's going to detain them, and they will be prosecuted. What he needs, and what the sheriffs across the state need, is more authority to address this, because actually detaining someone solely on the basis of immigration status is not a state law issue, and they would be violating the law. The sheriffs would be violating the law if they did that. But if there is a state violation, they can do something about this. Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is endorsing this race, is working on this very issue because the federal government has been suing Texas to keep them from protecting the border for you and I. Instead, the federal government should have written him a check with a big thank you, buddy, we sure appreciate you. There was no such thank you note written to the state of Texas. I will work with him to make sure that we have more tools in the state of Utah to address this issue. And that's what Texas is leading out on. I will lead out with him, and I will lead out here in the state of Utah to make sure that we can stop this flow. This is a humanitarian issue. I've been endorsed by the Cache, Davis, Weber, Millard, and Carbon County sheriffs. And what they have said is this is critical to them, and I will support them. Thank you.
Thank you. There's been a lot of talk on this issue about whether we are a sanctuary state, and you heard discussion about that. Let's be honest, we are a sanctuary country, and that's the problem. So there's been discussion about now whether this is a federal issue or a state issue. I mean, I'm a big believer in that the federal government has specific limited enumerated powers under Article 1, Section 8. And the problem is as we've talked about, they're overreaching into every conceivable area of our life, doing things they have no business doing. But the one thing they really need to do that is unquestionably what they should be doing is protecting the borders, and they're not doing it. Now, we know that Congress could solve this problem tomorrow. When I was chief counsel for a member of the US Senate, about 15 years ago, I spent a lot of time negotiating language on the Immigration and Nationality Act and negotiating what we could do, and specifically on things like H-1B visas. And it became really clear to me that Congress could solve the problem, but they won't. And that's the problem. And that's why, I mean, from a border standpoint, I'll tell you who could solve a lot of this. A president who actually enforced the law, right? Now, we haven't had that for the last 2 years. It's not, fundamentally, it's not a difficult problem to solve. This is something, I mean, we've solved much more difficult problems as a society. But the truth is, even though we're not a border state per se, we're a border state. Because what's happening on the border is implicating and hurting us here in the state of Utah. So as Attorney General, I will stand up on this issue. I will make sure that we do have tools, because there are things that we can do. I support fully what's happening with the governor of Texas, where he's basically saying, if you're not going to do your job under Article 1, Section 8, I'm going to do my job under Article 4 of the Constitution. And the Biden administration doesn't like that. And my attitude is, too bad. If you're not going to do your job, there are tools in the Constitution that allow us to do it for you. That's what an Attorney General does. That's it.
That's it.
Okay.
But I want before we end, I want to tell all of you, and I especially want to tell the, four of you sitting up here, that we are going to, this whole thing has been taped, video. We will send this to all over 4,000 state delegates with the link that they can just click on, and every state delegate will have the opportunity to hear what has happened today, because this is so important. What we have done today is given all of you the opportunity to see all four of these good people sitting here together, answering the same questions, and then as Rachel pointed out, as delegates, when you cast that vote. And that is so important. It's not flashy commercials or anything like that. You have heard what they have to say, and we want to do that. Eagle Forum is about education. That's what we exist to do, whether we're doing an event like this or with the legislature, one-on-one educating legislators. But that's what we're all about. And we want to educate every single state delegate on what has happened today. So thank you for joining us. I think, Barbara, you were going to come up here and finish off. We'll let you guys leave here today. Again, the same that we said earlier. If you want to talk with any of them, if you've got time and you can stay and visit, you can meet them out in the hall out there.
So it's been a great day. Wonderful information from our Senate candidates and our AG candidates. So it gives us some good knowledge and information to make votes. We are over time by an hour, so we will be wrapping up. We do have some quotes that we've always started Liberty Forum with that I want to share that are appropriate today. One is from the Bible, Isaiah 40:31, that says, "They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint." And then an American patriot, Thomas Paine, said, "Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigue of supporting it." Fatigue, boy. And German poet and lawyer Johann Goethe said, "Truth must be repeated again and again, because error is constantly being preached round about." All profound counsel. We will now remind you that our next Liberty Forum will be May 8th at the Provo Library, 10 to 12. And we'll have a closing prayer by Justina Cook. Thank you for being here today. It's been a wonderful meeting.
Heavenly Father, we are so very grateful unto Thee for the many blessings Thou givest to us. We're indeed grateful for our freedoms, for living in this country, for having Thy light and truth in our lives. We pray that we will be better safeguards of the light, to be beacons of that hope and light for other people. Please, Father, guide us in our efforts to serve Thee and in our efforts to keep this country free and under Thy direction. Please, Father, be with us in our deliberations and in our discussions in how best to continue to propel the freedom and the light knowledge that Thou hast given us. Please bless these candidates, their families, and all those who have been here today in their travels, and bless us all that we will know more freedom by being better stewards and be better disciples of Christ. And we say these things in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.